Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto was one of the Jedi. At the start of their trip, Naruto and Jiraiya find themselves pulled into the future by an unknown force. With no way back home, and no idea what's going on, what will they do? Join the Jedi, naturally. But there are other, more sinister forces after them as well. With the Force to wield and a new group of friends, can Naruto change the future of a galaxy threatened by darkness? Welcome aboard! Chapter 27. Mace had to fight the urge to growl as he raced through the narrow passage after Jenna's Ann Arbor. The entire operation was blown to pieces. 3 royal guards were dead. 2 more wounded. Potentially thousands of battle droids were hunting for them. His Padawan had run off without explanation or backup. And to cap it all off, he was now chasing one of the most dangerous women in the galaxy down a dark corridor with no idea what lay ahead. He only knew that if he did not catch up to her, people would die. He had seen the lives balanced on the Shatterpoint, and Ann Arbor was more than capable of taking them. For now, though, he dismissed all of those concerns as useless distractions. He could not solve those problems until he had solved this one, so he anchored his whole being in the present. If there was to be a later, he first had to survive the now. Priority 1 was catching up to Ann Arbor. He did not expect that would take long. It took a rare athlete to keep pace with any Jedi, let alone a master, and Ann Arbor was not that athlete. She was fairly fleet, but he could already hear her footsteps growing closer. He would catch her in less than a minute, he estimated. Of course, catching her came with its own complications. Namely, surviving whatever trap she no doubt had waiting for him. He would just have to trust in the Force to guide him. It always had. As he had expected, Ann Arbor came into view just a few seconds later. Before he could yell at her to stop, though, she skidded to a halt and turned to face him. He slowed to a stop himself and held his lightsaber at the ready. All of his senses flared into high alert at the unexpected turn of events. Surrender. In the name of the Republic, you are under arrest. Come quietly, and I will guarantee you a fair trial. She sneered and let out a derisive laugh. Oh, I don't think so, Master Jedi. I have no intention of going back to prison. No, I think you're going to let me go. Mace tensed and tightened his grip on his lightsaber, but he made no move to attack. She had not yet offered him violence, and besides, a woman like her would have taken measures to ensure he could not just strike her down. A trap linked to her vitals, perhaps, or some prearranged catastrophe only she could stop. He did not like the implications of her statement, nor her unwavering confidence. It was never good criminals like her were confident. The Shatterpoint around her had not resolved. If anything, it had grown stronger, more obvious. All of his instincts, honed over decades of missions, screamed that he had made a terrible mistake. Why would I do that? He asked. He had to keep her talking. The more she said, the more information he could gather, and the more time he would have to formulate a plan. Ann Arbor smirked and kicked a crate by her foot. It fell open, revealing some sort of cylindrical device, about half a meter tall, with a bulge running around its middle. The moment he saw it, the Shatterpoint shifted from Ann Arbor to the device. Because you'll be too busy disarming this bomb. It goes off in 15 minutes, and when it does, it'll contaminate this entire base, not to mention all of Theed and everything in between. Mace grits his teeth. Contaminate? This is a bioweapon. But I recognize the design. This is not your work. You mentioned a partner? Ann Arbor actually giggled and clapped like a child. Ah, very good, Master Jedi. So, there is a brain under all that scowling. Yes, dear Granta shared his designs with me. I added my own touch, of course, but the man does have creativity. And such a lovely hatred of Jedi. Even stronger than mine, in fact. It's a pity he couldn't be here for this, but I'm afraid he's far too busy playing with your little Padawan. Mace stiffened, and ice crawled up his spine. It took all of his iron-hard discipline to keep his bearing. Naruto was not ready to face an experienced Jedi killer like Granta Omega, not without backup. The boy was going to get himself killed with his recklessness. Right then, as if the universe had been waiting for that exact thought, he felt his Padawan bond with Naruto erupt with sudden shock and pain. Wherever Naruto had gotten to, he was in trouble. Naruto can take care of himself much better than most Padawans, Mace reminded himself. I cannot help him if I die here. I need to keep her talking. How did you both end up with Black Sun? Zon Arbor rolled her eyes and spoke as if she were indulging a small child. Black Sun hired him to help them conquer this damp little backwater. He must have recognized that such a project was practically begging for my talents, so he broke me out of that dreadful prison camp Kagon threw me in. I heard he died here. Pity I couldn't watch. What is Omega planning? He asked. Oh, a great many things, I'm sure. I do hope he remembers to collect the data I asked for as he kills your Padawan. Naruto, was it? Anyway, you Jedi so rarely have the decency to die in a laboratory setting. It would be criminal of me to waste such an dash. She paused abruptly and glanced down at the bioweapon. When she looked back up, her mask of false cheer was gone, and a cold, detached air had taken its place. Very clever. Trying to keep me here until I have to deactivate the bomb myself, or else die in the blast. A good plan, but I think not. Goodbye, Jedi. I look forward to studying your death. With that, she turned and ran off down the tunnel, leaving Mace alone with the bomb. Granta Omega. The name alone acted like a bucket of ice water thrown on Naruto's head. This was the man who had captured and tortured Anakin on 2 occasions and had nearly killed Master Yaddle. He was the closest thing to the bogeyman that the Jedi had, aside from the Sith. The shock of hearing his enemy's name had one benefit, though. His scattered, muddled thoughts instantly snapped into something at least adjacent to clarity, spurred on by adrenaline. He still could not move, but at least now he could string a coherent thought together in less than 5 minutes. With his brain more or less back in action, his training kicked in. As per usual, the pressure of a sudden, life-or-death situation kicked his already busy mind into overdrive. Fortunately, Granta seemed preoccupied with something on the computer console. Step 1, self-assess, he thought. I'd been hit with a stun baton, hard. Definitely got a concussion, maybe a skull fracture. Criff, that hurts like a bitch. Muscles are still paralyzed, but I can already feel my toes. I guess the QB is making himself useful, for once. Maybe a minute until I can get up, maybe more. I won't be much use in a fight, though. He grits his teeth and tried to wiggle his fingers. The effort involved sent a fresh torrent of pain through his head and tore an involuntary groan from his mouth. Granta must have noticed the noise, because he turned his attention away from whatever he had been doing at the terminal and looked over at Naruto. When he spotted his feebly twitching fingers, he rolled his eyes and walked back over to Naruto. Don't bother. Your feeble efforts won't get you anywhere, Jedi. As he spoke, he calmly stepped on Naruto's fingers, breaking 2 of them. You're going to die here, Jedi. So just lie there and enjoy your last few minutes while I make some final arrangements. Oh, and if you're hoping for rescue, don't bother. Your master is busy dealing with my partner, and those irksome royal guards have no way of getting through the blast doors. I will not suffer interruptions. Naruto had to bite back a scream as 2 of the fingers on his left hand snapped under Granta's boot. It wasn't a debilitating injury like his head wound was, but it certainly wouldn't help him in a fight. Okay, step 2, he thought, trying to ignore his growing desperation. Play for time. Get him talking until I can stand, at least. What are you doing here? He bit out through the pain and numbness. Why Black Sun? Why? Naboo? Granta snorted in contempt. Do at least try to think. With the resources of Black Sun behind me, and mind control drugs my partner and I have developed here, I could raise whole armies of assassins in mere weeks. Totally obedient, nearly undetectable. The galaxy has so many poor, downtrodden people that no one would miss. I could have decimated the Jedi Order, avenged my father, and seized more power than you could comprehend. Your partner? Who would work with you? At that, Granta smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. It crawled across his face like a fungus, devoid of any warmth or humanity. You may have heard of her. Jenna Zon Arbor. She's currently keeping your master busy, so we can have this oh-so-pleasant chat. Naruto swallowed hard, his throat suddenly bone dry. If Granta Omega was the bogeyman, Jenna Zonarbor was at least as bad, and probably worse. From his studies he knew she had devastated whole worlds for profit, and she had a predilection for experimenting on Jedi. If Mace was tangling with her, then he would likely have his hands full. As a matter of fact, she's the reason I didn't just shoot you in the head and be done with it, Granta continued. She asked that I gather as much data from your death as possible. She's ever so fascinated by what makes you Jedi tick, and I figured it might come in handy, so here we are. He pressed a couple of buttons on the console and flicked a switch. Naruto heard the faint, rising whine of something powering up. Up on the ceiling, 4 pairs of red optical sensors flickered into life, and a moment later, 4 large droids dropped from above and landed on the floor hard enough to crack the duracrete. They were imposing, standing just a hair shy of 2 meters tall, with long, powerful-looking limbs. Their abdomens were narrow, while their shoulders were wide, and their whole bodies looked heavily armored. Their faces were eerily skull-like, with large, glowing red eyes and mask-like vocabulators. Overall, they were not like any other droids Naruto had seen before. If he had to guess, he would say they were a Halloween Laboratories product, maybe even part of the IG line, but not a model he recognized. Each droid carried a different weapon. One had a long electrostaff, vibrant electricity crackling at either end. Another held a pair of vicious-looking vibraswords, whose high-pitched hum set his teeth on edge. The third wielded 2 E5 blaster carbines as if they were pistols. The final droid carried a fearsome-looking TL heavy repeating blaster rifle. Do you like them? Advanced processing core, reinforced chassis with duranium armor plating, the latest in heuristic learning programming. They're brand new, prototypes, really. It took some doing, acquiring them, but I think it'll be worth it. I programmed them myself to fight Jedi, and they can learn as they go. What do you think? Why are you doing this? The Jedi never did anything to you. Naruto thought he could see how this was going to go, and he didn't like what he saw. His best chance was to buy as much time as he could to recover before Granta loosed his droids on him. From Anakin's stories, if there was one thing that could get Granta Omega raving, it was talking about the Jedi. As he had expected, Granta's face turned purple and twisted with rage. Nothing. You call how the Jedi treated my father nothing. They humiliated him. Exiled him. Murdered him. And then they had the gall to cover it up and call him a criminal, call him fallen. I'm doing this so I can wipe every one of you carking Jedi out of existence. By the end of his rant, Granta was practically frothing at the mouth. His mask of cheerful insouciance had shattered, and in its place was a seething madness that lit his eyes like fire. Naruto flinched and eyed him warily. He realized too late that he may have miscalculated. Granta's hold on reason was obviously tenuous, and pushing his buttons may not have been wise. If he snapped before Naruto was ready, things could get dicey. He might just decide to kill him, or worse, take out his ire on the hostages still in their cages. What made it even more unsettling for Naruto was that he still could not sense anything from the man at all. He should have been a raging maelstrom of wrathful insanity, but he remained a virtual ghost in the Force. It made predicting his behavior a matter of uncertain guesswork. Fortunately, rather than devolve further into his obvious madness, Granta seemed to realize his slip and reined himself back in. As Naruto watched, he carefully reapplied his guise of sanity. The broken fire vanished from his eyes, and body relaxed into a less threatening posture. Anyway, none of that really matters to you now, he said, his voice still raw from screaming. Here's what's going to happen now. I'm going to leave. You're going to stand up, and these droids of mine are going to attack you. Once they're done killing you, and believe me they will kill you, they'll transmit all the data from the fight to my ship, or I will use it to improve their combat programming so they can kill more Jedi in the future. And just in case you were thinking of dying straight away to deny me the data, for every minute you survive, I'll spare 10% of my test subjects. The rest will die as soon as you do. What will it be, little Jedi? Granta shot him one final, mocking grin, and sauntered off towards a side exit. When he reached for the panel to open the door, however, he jerked back in surprise and drew a blaster pistol as a kunai buried itself in the controls in a shower of sparks. You're not going anywhere, Naruto said as he struggled to his feet. Whether or not your droids kill me, you're still going down for this. Now, let's go. Mace worked furiously to disarm the bioweapon in front of him, but he was not making any progress. Wary of traps, he had to proceed with a maddening degree of caution, one that would have taxed his patience even without the steadily dwindling timer. Even once he had opened the bomb's casing, he faced such a complicated array of wires and components, only half of which he even recognized, that he was at a loss on how to proceed. Mace was a skilled enough engineer, but he was no Skywalker. This was beyond him. Zon Arbor had made more than just a few adjustments to Granta Omega's original design. So far as he could tell, only the dispersal mechanism and the power core remained unaltered. Everything else, from the trigger mechanism to the multitude of fail-deadly safeguards, was completely different and highly tamper-resistant. He counted at least 8 separate circuits connecting the timer to the trigger alone, any one of which could set off the bomb. Clearly, Zon Arbor had never intended for him to actually disarm the device. Even so, he persevered. He had no other option. Without the technical expertise he needed to disable the bioweapon properly, he instead relied on the Force to guide his hand. One by one, relying on the most minute signals from the Force, Mace began isolating and disabling the various pathways to detonation. It was slow, painstaking work, and the focus required was giving him a headache, but he ignored it. The constant sense of pain and danger coming from the Padawan bond was also distracting, but he ignored that, too. Duty came first, always. All that mattered was keeping the bioweapon from detonating. He could help Naruto deal with Granta Omega after he saved the continent from Zon Arbor's bomb. Perhaps, if he'd had more time, he could have done it. With his Shatterpoint ability to guide him, Mace thought he might have been able to successfully disarm the bomb in 10 minutes, perhaps 15 at the most. Sadly, he had less than 2 minutes left on the timer, and was barely a quarter of the way done with his work. As the time relentlessly ticked away, he began to cast about for alternative solutions. As a last resort, I can just stab it with my lightsaber, he thought. It will explode, and I will almost certainly die, but maybe, if I am fast enough, I can destroy enough of the biotoxin to save everyone else. It was a grim sort of thought, but he was in a grim situation. If it came down to it, he was more than prepared to give his life to save his Padawan and the others. It was a sacrifice every Jedi was willing to make. Before it came to that, though, he was going to try everything else he could think of. I just need some way to contain the blast. Some sort of airtight vessel, or maybe. His mind lit on an idea so unlikely that, had he been even an iota less desperate, he would have dismissed it out of hand. As it was, he didn't see any other choice. Trusting that the Force was guiding him, he reached into the pouch on his belt and withdrew the storage scroll Naruto had made for him on the flight to Naboo. Using it was risky. He had been practicing with it ever since Naruto had given it to him, but he was still far from proficient. He had yet to successfully seal anything larger than a credit chit into the scroll, and even that failed half the time. At the moment, however, he didn't see that he had any better options. He had to neutralize the bomb, and quickly, before Naruto wound up and over his head. Once again, as if the universe enjoyed affirming his worst fears, he felt a fresh surge of pain and distress echo down his bond with Naruto. Whatever he had gotten into, he was now in serious danger. That alone was enough to remove any lingering doubts Mace had about his plan. He unrolled the scroll and glanced at the timer. There were just under 90 seconds left. I suppose there's nothing like a field test, he thought as he focused on generating chakra. He had improved over the last week, but it still took him almost a minute before he had a stable enough pool. The moment he did, he placed his hand on the sealing array and channeled his chakra as Naruto had shown him. There was a whooshing noise, and a cloud of white smoke erupted around him. Mace coughed and waved his hand to disperse the smoke. When he did, however, his heart sank. The bomb was still in front of him, its timer steadily counting down. He had fewer than 30 seconds now. Without hesitating, he focused his chakra once more and tried again. Whoosh! Smoke. The bomb was still there. 20 seconds left. Again. More smoke. More failure. 15 seconds. Again. Nothing. 10 seconds. Last chance, he thought as he brought everything he knew about chakra to mind. It responded to willpower. He knew that, so he focused on every reason why he needed, to seal the bioweapon into the scroll. The unknown millions across the continent who would die if he failed. The innocent hostages whom he was here to rescue. The brave royal guards who had trusted him to lead them wisely. And, foremost of all, his reckless, brave Padawan, whom he was growing genuinely fond of in spite of himself. Naruto's vast potential, his magnetic personality, and his mind-boggling stubborn bravery had all conspired to slip through his typical detachment and forge an emotional bond to go right along with their growing master-Padawan bond. He could save all those people. He would save all those people. With those thoughts fixed firmly at the front of his mind, he summoned up all the determination that had propelled him through life thus far, the sort of determination to which you could moor a starship, and pushed his chakra into the scroll one last time. Once again, smoke billowed from the scroll, accompanied by the now familiar whooshing noise. This time, however, he felt something different, like some sort of twisting sensation. With his lightsaber ready, just in case, he brushed the smoke aside to check on the results. Sure enough, the bomb was gone. When he glanced down at the scroll, he saw the sealing array had shifted to indicate there was something contained within. He absently resolved to eject it into a star at the first opportunity. Without even realizing it, Mace released his hold on his chakra. It was only when he felt his arms seemingly double in weight that he realized how much energy sealing the bioweapon had taken out of him. His whole body felt wrung out, as though he had been working hard for several days without food or sleep. Obviously, his chakra control needed work. If such a simple technique wore him out this much. He had no time to recover, however. No sooner had he reconnected with the Force than he was inundated with a flood of pain, fear, and desperate determination from his bond with Naruto. It was a confusing mess of sensations, and their bond was still too new for him to glean more details, but he did not need them. All that mattered was that Naruto was badly hurt, in terrible danger, and Mace was going to save him. Again, pure, old-fashioned adrenaline, combined with a hasty, on-the-fly Jedi restoration cantrip, pushed him to his feet and propelled him back down the hallway he had come from earlier. With every sharp pant that came from the bond, a matching stab of self-recrimination rose to meet it. How the hell did this happen? That one thought kept echoing over and over in Mace Windu's head as he sprinted as fast as he dared through the labyrinthine hallways of the Black Sun hideout. How did this happen? How did he let this happen? Over and over, the same question pushed its way into his mind, but he ignored it. He had something more important to focus on, that being the bond with his Padawan. A bond which now echoed with pain. A bond which, the sly voice of fear whispered, seemed a bit fainter than it had just moments ago, a bit weaker. Almost as if Naruto were. No! He crushed the thought before it could even fully form and pushed himself even faster. He will be fine. You just have to hang on. I'm coming for you, Naruto, just hang on. After Naruto threw down his challenge, he wasted no time in trying to back it up. With the new method Mace had helped him discover, he should theoretically be able to switch between chakra and the Force in an instant, quick enough for combat. So far, he was still a little shaky on the technique, but necessity would have to take the place of practice. He wasn't sure just what sort of capabilities these new droids possessed, but Granta Omega was not one for idle threats, and he knew how to fight Jedi. If he was confident the droids could kill Naruto, then it would be a poor idea to treat them lightly. Even fresh, he would be wary of facing such opponents. Now, with his head wound messing with his coordination and slowing his reactions, he was in very real trouble. As such, Naruto went all out from the start. He didn't want to give the droids time to get a read on his combat abilities and counter them, so he molded chakra, crossed his fingers, and performed his signature jutsu, Taiju Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. The sudden flood of 24 identical clones had Granta reeling back in shock, his mouth hanging open, which was exactly the sort of reaction Naruto had been going for. The droids were harder to read, but he was hoping such an abrupt change in battle conditions would give them pause. His clones, acting on the orders he had created them with, each pulled out a kunai and leaped into the air. As they descended towards the droids, their kunai flickered with a blue halo as they channeled wind chakra through them. Naruto had yet to fully master the technique, and could not make the chakra flow as sharp or as even as he wanted, but he was hoping it would suffice to cut through the droid's more vulnerable joints. After all, he figured, every armor had its weak points. Even as his clones made to attack the droids, Naruto had his own target, Granta Omega himself. While he hoped the clones could destroy, or at least damage, some of the droids, their primary function was to serve as a distraction. If he could just get to Granta, then he could force the man to shut down his droids and free the hostages. He darted through the crowd of clones and rushed towards him, lightsaber already moving to destroy his blaster. The droids were busy. Granta was too stunned to react in time. It looked for all the world as though his hasty, slapdash plan was going to work. Naturally, as had been the norm for the entire mission, that was when it all went wrong. Before Naruto even got within 2 meters of Granta, the droid with the 2 blaster carbines opened fire, shooting with a speed no organic being could hope to replicate. It laid down a withering storm of blaster bolts at the clones, each fired with deadly accuracy. As bunched up as the clones were, they didn't last long. Most died in the first second, with the lethal streaks of red plasma often dispatching 2, or even 3 clones at once. Those few that survived the initial barrage fell moments later, picked off by precise shots to the head. At the same time, as Naruto went to destroy Granta's blaster, a crackling electrostaff swung with startling speed to block his strike. He expected his lightsaber to shear straight through the weapon, but to his surprise, the searing bar of orange plasma stopped dead, barely leaving a mark. There was no time for him to process his shock, however. A flicker of movement in the corner of his eye was the only warning he got before the vibrosword-wielding droid was right next to him, its blades already moving to cut him in half. With head still swimming from the earlier blow, all Naruto could manage was a clumsy lunge away from the swords. It saved him from being bifurcated, but he was too slow to avoid the blow entirely. One of the blades tore across his left side, and a line of fiery agony bloomed in its wake. Ag! Naruto instinctively pressed a hand to the wound, and felt blood, warm and sticky, already soaking his tunic. His mesh armor had kept the blade from cutting through his ribs, but it was still a nasty, painful wound. Not immediately life-threatening, but not an encouraging sign of his chances against Granta's droids, either. He jumped backwards to gain space, and used it as an opportunity to reconnect to the Force and reassess the droids. To his dismay, it didn't look as if any of his clones had done more than scratch the droid's armor before they perished. Criff, he thought. I can't afford to create more clones. Those things move too fast, I need my precog. I'll just have to pick them off one at a time. Because that'll definitely be easy. He didn't have time for further thoughts, though, as the Force sent him a warning just in time for him to dodge away from an incoming sphere of shimmering blue energy that was speeding towards his head. It was traveling slowly, for a blaster bolt, and Naruto ducked out of the way with ease. Boom! The giant, searing hot hand of an explosion slammed into his back, and flung him forward several meters. He just barely turned his unexpected fall into a clumsy roll, and gasped with pain as his bruised, scorched back came into contact with the floor. Behind him, 3 of the cages had been torn to shreds, along with the hostages inside of them. As he came out of the roll, he saw the gently smoking barrel of the TL heavy repeater, from whence the concussion blast had apparently come. I thought you were going to save all these people, little Jedi, Granta said, his voice high and taunting. I must say, you're not off to a great start. Shut up, you sick bastard. You're gonna pay for everyone you've murdered. I'll make dash. Naruto had to cut his rant short when the carbine-wielding droid opened fire at him with a series of rapid shots. If he had thought the B-1S from earlier had tested his defense, they were nothing compared to the barrage from this one single droid. Where the B-1S had gotten by on massed fire and confined quarters, with little accuracy to speak of, this thing combined deadly speed with the unnerving precision of a machine. In mere seconds, he found himself blocking desperately just to stay alive. One bolt singed his elbow, and another grazed his right knee, forcing him to draw on the Force to shove the pain aside. It proved to be nothing more than a distraction, however, as the electrostaff-wielding one darted forward and jabbed Naruto in the side with its weapon hard enough to knock him off his feet. He felt one of his ribs break, and the arcing energy danced across his body in little rivers of agony. Once more, he had to turn his fall into a roll, this time to avoid the follow-up strike that would have crushed his head. No sooner had he regained his feet than he saw the heavy repeater pointing his way, the barrel glowing with the telltale blue sheen of a charging concussion shot. Fueled by nothing but instinct and adrenaline, Naruto jumped straight up and let the shock wave of the explosion carry him up into the support beams of the ceiling, where the droids had been hiding before Granta activated them. At the same time, he palmed a smoke capsule and tossed it into the middle of the 4 droids to obscure their vision. The thick, billowing gray clouds would not hide him for long, not from advanced optical sensors, but it would give him a few seconds. I've got to destroy the one with the repeater, he thought. That last shot killed another 4 prisoners. It'll destroy the whole room if it keeps this up. I just need to distract the other 3, and then I can get in a clean strike. His fingers trembled from pain and blood loss as he prepared his distraction. Between the QB and the Force, he had managed to stay conscious so far, but he couldn't afford to take any more wounds. Already, he could feel the gash on his side sapping his strength, while his head swam from what he was now sure was a skull fracture. Sadly, he didn't really think he was going to have much say in the matter. He couldn't hide forever, and the smokescreen was already clearing. Just before the smoke could thin to where it would reveal his position, Naruto threw the kunai he had prepared right at the feet of the droids and made a single hand sign. The 3 explosive tags he had wrapped around the handle flowed briefly and then detonated with enough force to send all 4 droids tumbling backwards. Their armor absorbed most of the blast, but it was enough to buy him the opening he needed. A fraction of a second after the tags went off, Naruto jumped from his perch in the ceiling supports down towards his chosen target. It was a far cry from his usual grace, more of a half-aimed fall than a precise leap, but gravity and his lightsaber worked together to compensate for his injury-induced clumsiness. His blade carved straight through the TL repeater and severed one of the arms holding it. His knees buckled under the force of his landing and his side felt as though he had just laid it open anew, but Naruto refused to let that stop him. With a raw shout that was half determination, half pain, he lunged upwards and stabbed the droid right through the center of its torso. It felt like forcing a sword through a thick plank of hardwood, but the duranium armor could not stand up to a direct strike from a Jedi's weapon, and he saw the orange glow of his blade as it emerged from the droid's back. The impaled droid jerked its limbs for a moment, as if trying to still attack him, but the stab must have destroyed some vital system or other. A moment later, its glowing red optical sensors flickered and died. Naruto gasped in exhausted triumph, but his victory would prove to be a costly one. The Force sent a warning, and he could hear the blaster firing, but his arms felt as though they were encased in lead. He simply couldn't move them fast enough, no matter how hard he tried. All he could do was watch, as if from a very great distance, as the first bolt streamed past his face, and the second slammed into his right forearm. The force of the shot tore his lightsaber from his grasp and sent it clattering across the floor. Only his armored gauntlet, one of Kakashi's gifts to him, saved his hand from likely amputation. Even so, it didn't stop the pain. Someone had lit his arm on fire, or else dunked it into molten lava. That was the only explanation for the torrent of agony that raced from his elbow to his fingertips. The smell of cooked meat filled his nose, and it took a moment for him to process that it was coming from his arm. His already shaky legs weren't up to the task of keeping him on his feet, and so the impact of the shot spun him around to land on his butt. In front of him, he saw the droid with the vibraswords jump into a graceful arc. An arc, he realized dimly, that would end with those swords slicing through his neck. He also saw Granta Omega, standing in front of rows of his caged victims, grinning with manic glee at the prospect of watching a Jedi die. That wasn't right. Naruto had promised that he would save those people in the cages. He'd promised that he would make Granta pay for his crimes. If he died here, then all the hostages would die too, and Granta would get away. That was unacceptable. It could not happen. So, Naruto decided to make sure that it did not happen, and step one was not getting his head cut off. He could feel the fox battering furiously at its cage, desperately trying to get him to use its power, but he ignored it. It was practically a habit by now. Instead, he recalled his first time using the Force without meditating, when he saved Ahsoka and the rescued slave women from the Black Sun gangsters nearly a year ago. He brought forth the same sort of feelings now, his will to protect others, his determination to keep his promises, and desire to see Granta Omega face justice for all the atrocities he had committed. Then, in a single, timeless moment, when everything else fell away, he forged all of those feelings into a shining star of power, reached for the Force, and pushed. The two vibraswords were a bare millimeter from his throat when he acted. They shattered like glass under the sheer power of his Force blast. His attack tore the droid holding them to pieces and hurled them back across the room so fast they practically left vapor trails. The other two droids had just enough time to brace themselves against the sudden assault, but they still went sliding across the floor and into the row of cages. The bars bent from the impact, but it wasn't enough to disable the two droids. Granta did not have the reaction times or the strength of his droids, however. He sailed through the air and landed in a crumpled heap by the same exit he had tried to escape through earlier. The memory of his shocked yelp would bring a smile to Naruto's face for years to come. Despite his impressive display of power, it by no means spelled victory. Despite being shoved across the room and slammed into durasteel bars, the two remaining droids were still operational. Their armor was battered and their movements were jerky, but they were far from defeated. As he watched them recover from his attack and walk towards him, Naruto finally felt the icy grip of despair. He didn't have the energy for another force attack like that. Already, darkness was encroaching on the edges of his vision. Everything was fuzzy, and a persistent buzz filled his ears. There was simply no way he could destroy the final two droids, not in his condition. Despite his best efforts, despite giving it everything he had, he could not keep his promises. He was going to die here, surrounded by people he had failed to save. Just as he prepared himself to face his death, he felt something. Something in the Force, something coming his way. While his thoughts all felt slow and sticky, he recognized the feeling almost immediately. It was the relentless will and drive of his master, and it was headed right for him. A renewed sense of strength and hope flowed down the Padawan bond, stilling his trembling limbs and dulling the pain of his injuries. Accompanying the soothing balm was, to Naruto's immense surprise, his master's voice echoing in his head. "You just have to hang on. I'm coming for you, Naruto, just hang on." It was the first time either of them had managed to send actual words through their bond. More important even than that major milestone were the words themselves. His master was coming for him. Everything would be alright. All he had to do was stay alive for a few minutes, and then Mace would arrive to help him. "I can do this," Naruto thought, his renewed sense of hope sitting in his chest like a warm fire. He summoned his lightsaber back to his hand, and the snap hiss of the blade igniting might as well have been a chorus. "Alright, you walking scrap heaps, time for round 2. The next few minutes of his life were a chaotic blur of movement and pain. Despite being buoyed by the knowledge that help was on the way, Naruto's injuries were no less severe, nor the droids any less deadly. In the future, Naruto would only ever be able to recall the fight as a series of brief flashes of clarity interspersed amongst a mess of noise and color like rocks in a river. He remembered desperately blocking blaster fire from one droid while the other rushed in to attack with its electrostaff. Over and over, he felt a snap of pain as the crackling polearm scored a glancing blow, but he refused to drop his lightsaber. He remembered using the Force to pull the droid with the two blaster carbines towards him. It dug its feet into the floor, leaving deep grooves, and Naruto ended up flying towards it, but the result was the same. He landed a blow, severing its left arm at the elbow joint. He had been aiming for its head, but considering by now he was seeing triple, he was just glad he'd hit the droid at all. He remembered very clearly the moment when the sparking end of the electrostaff slammed straight into the still bleeding wound on his side. The pain was indescribable, like taking another one of Sasuke's Chidori while also being torn in half. It was so bad that he actually blacked out for a moment. Only the feel of his burned back slamming into the cold bars of the cage the droid had flung him into snapped him back to reality. Most of all, though, he remembered thinking that his master could really stand to hurry the fuck up, because he didn't know how much longer he could keep going like this. After what could have been minutes or hours, Naruto really couldn't tell anymore. The door to the room shattered, and a violet glow lit the room. To his eyes, which refused to focus, it looked like a purple meteor smashed into the droids. One of them fell into two pieces, bisected from top to bottom. The other lost its legs and then its head to a single, sweeping flourish of violet light. Naruto blinked and squinted to try and bring his vision into focus, but it was futile. With the droids gone and his master there, whatever had been fueling him for the past few minutes was finally leaving his system. "Hey, master. You took your time," he said. He tried to say more, but his tongue seemed to have gone on strike. The world started tilting crazily around him, and a black fog was swallowing everything. His eyelids grew heavier and heavier, and the last thing he saw before he drifted into darkness was Mace rushing towards him, a concerned look on his face. Then everything was cool and dark, and he knew no more. When Naruto woke up, he fully expected to find himself in his mindscape, with the Kyuubi ready to deliver another mocking lecture. It was, therefore, a pleasant surprise when he instead woke up in a soft bed, covered in warm blankets, with rosy, late afternoon sunlight streaming in through the windows. Grogginess clung to him like a cobweb, and he had to poke his brain with a stick a few times until it shuddered and wheezed into some sort of reluctant facsimile of awareness. He wasn't sure where he was, or how he had gotten there, but he could feel his master's presence nearby, sending him feelings of rest and calm. While the chains of exhaustion kept him firmly moored in place, that was okay. Mace was telling him he was safe, so everything was alright. He wondered where he was, though. As he burned off the fog of sleep, he noticed the overly white ceiling, the faint electronic whir of machinery, and a tinge of antiseptic in the air. When he finally turned his head, he also noticed in his arm, the tube hooked up to a bag of faintly yellow liquid. Clearly, he was in a hospital of some sort. That realization blunted his feelings of general contentment somewhat. Hospitals were to be avoided, or failing that, escaped. Ending up in a hospital was one of the surest ways to put him in a bad mood. That feeling only intensified when the rest of his body chose that moment to wake up and demand its share of attention. For the most part, it did this by hurting. His whole torso ached, especially where that vibrasword had sliced him open. His head throbbed in time with his heartbeat. His forearm felt raw and tender where he had gotten shot. He had a dry mouth and a sweet taste on his tongue. He thought he recognized it, but he didn't know from where. 1,000 other minor aches and pains all sounded off, accompanied by a backup tune of general exhaustion and weakness. Clearly, any plans he might have had to escape would have to wait. All he could really do at the moment was give voice to what he was feeling. "Ooh wow," he moaned. A moment later, he heard someone moving out of his field of view. When they stepped around to where he could see them, he was greeted by his master's grim visage. Right now, though, Mace's normally unreadable face showed hints of concern, relief, and something else that Naruto couldn't identify. They were subtle hints, but for a man who normally made droids look expressive, they might as well have been glowing signs. "You're awake. How are you feeling, Naruto?" "Like a hot sat on me." "How long was I out?" "Almost 24 hours. Mace didn't elaborate, and instead just fixed him with a penetrating stare. After a while, Naruto squirmed uncomfortably. He had a feeling he knew what was coming next, and it wasn't anything he wanted to deal with ever, actually. Still, he didn't think he could avoid it. "No, you cannot avoid this," Mace said, apparently reading his mind. "You ran off alone, with no explanation, no idea of what was waiting for you, and no thought given to any potential traps or ambushes. You nearly got yourself killed." "Explain." Naruto winced at the cold, clinical tone Mace took with him as he laid out his actions. He had to admit, when put like that, it didn't sound good, but he wasn't going to just meekly accept a lecture. He'd had good reasons for what he had done. "I didn't just run off on a whim," he said. It was a struggle to keep his tone respectful, a struggle he was losing, judging by how Mace narrowed his eyes. "I could feel everyone they were keeping prisoner. When that lady, Zahn Arbor, used her wrist computer, I felt they were in danger. They were being tortured. I had to do something. I promised I would do something." He had worked himself up to a shout by the time he had finished speaking, and the unexpected burst of emotion left him panting and wrung out. He had to run through a breathing exercise to calm himself down and find his center again. Mace just sighed and punched the bridge of his nose. "Naruto, I am not angry that you went to save those people. That was noble and selfless of you, and I'm proud to see such traits in my Padawan. I am upset because you did it in a reckless, ill-conceived manner that put the entire mission at risk. I was right there. Captain Panika, Lieutenant Typho, and 9 other royal guards were right there. Why did you not ask any of us to follow you, to watch your back?" Naruto opened his mouth to retort, but nothing came out. There was nothing there. Looking back, there was no reason he couldn't have done that. Just like that, all the fight drained out of him, and he slumped back into his pillows. Mace took his silence as a chance to keep talking. "You let yourself get caught up in the moment and you acted on your emotions rather than controlling them. You cannot let that happen, Padawan. Next time, the consequences could be more severe. But I've always used my emotions. They make me stronger. Even Master Proof said that the Jedi should explore using them. As fuel, Naruto. That does not mean surrendering to them and letting them dictate our actions. Perhaps emotions can be a source of strength, as you have shown, but only if you master them. When you let them steer your decisions rather than fuel your determination, you make stupid, sloppy mistakes like you did. Naruto glanced away, unable to meet his master's eyes any longer as the sheer weight of just how stupid he had been sunk in. He had fucked up, and it had nearly gotten hundreds of innocent people killed. Shame, hot and sharp, burned in his gut. Mace sighed again and reached out to squeeze his shoulder, simultaneously sending a wave of reassurance down their bond. Do not be too hard on yourself, Padawan. This situation is, at least partially, my fault. Your fault? What are you talking about, Master? I'm the one that ran off like an idiot, and I am the one who should have seen that you were in no state to go on that mission. You were still shocked by what you felt during the assassination attempt on Queen Amidala. Your empathic powers are still untrained, and I knew that there were traumatized prisoners in that base. I should have known that being that close to them, feeling their pain so acutely, would distract you and compromise your judgment. I should never have taken you in there, and for that, I am sorry. Naruto didn't know how to respond to that. Part of him wanted to object that there was no way his emotions had compromised him going into the mission. After all, he had told his master he was fine, and he was no liar. Looking back on the long list of poor decisions he had made, though, he couldn't find it in him to stay indignant. More importantly, Mace was apologizing to him. That was not how things worked. That was the opposite of how things worked. He was the one who apologized to his master, not the other way around. Still, it had happened, and now he had to respond to it. It's fine, Master. I should have been more careful. Mace nodded. We both should have done better. Speaking of which, what specifically did you learn from this? That I need to work on my defense? Naruto got a faint sense of exasperated amusement from his master. The older man gestured for him to keep talking. Back in the temple, you asked me why I chose to specialize in Juyo. I chose Juyo because I thought it was the best fit for me, but maybe I was wrong. For the whole mission, I've been on the defensive in every fight I've been in. If I had been better at, maybe I wouldn't have gotten hurt so bad. It took this to get that lesson through to you? Naruto could only scratch the back of his head in embarrassment. Mace shook his head but didn't press the issue. Juyo is a good fit for you, Naruto, but not on its own. Your natural fighting style is more defensive than you realize. When we get back, I will help you learn more about Sorisu and Shurin. You might also seek out Master Unduli and Knight Kenobi. Both of them are experts at the various defensive forms. Naruto nodded, grateful for his master's understanding and willingness to help. So, does this mean I'm not going to be punished? Mace gave him another long, blank stare. I think the beating you took should serve as an adequate lesson on why you should not run off like that, he said after a long silence. Naruto perked up at the idea of avoiding whatever special hell his master might otherwise have put him through, but then Mace kept talking. Of course, I will have to let Jiraiya know you dropped your guard and let someone get the drop on you. I imagine he will have a few things to say about that. Naruto wilted in despair. He's going to hollow out my soul, he said tonelessly. Jiraiya would no doubt take great pains to ensure that he never so much as contemplated running off blindly again. He loved his godfather, but the man tended to express his concern by training him into the ground over and over again until he deemed his skills adequate. Perhaps, Mace said. Never do something like this again, Naruto, he added over their bond. Seeing you in such a state was unpleasant. You are lucky to have survived, and I do not ever want to see the day when that luck runs out. Hearing Mace's voice through their link was a new and somewhat odd experience for Naruto, but one he cherished. It was a sign that their bond as master and Padawan was growing stronger. He wasn't sure if he could send words through himself, but he tried it anyway. Yes, master. And thank you for saving me. Mace nodded once and gave his shoulder another squeeze. Get some more rest, Naruto. I have to go speak to the queen about our mission, but I am sure she will want to visit you later. Naruto nodded sleepily. What little energy he'd had was already fading. He laid his head back on his pillows without complaint, and he was asleep before Mace had even left the room. It had been a long few days for Padme Amidala. From the attempt on her life to finding out that Dane Tapolo was complicit in some of the worst crimes in Naboo's history to the stress of dealing with the fallout from the raid on the Black Sun base, this was the hardest week she'd had since the occupation. There had been bright spots, such as when she had seen just how many people the Jedi and Captain Panica's team had saved from the secret compound, but even that had been marred with tragedy. Many of those people, both human and Gungan, had already suffered experimentation and exposure to whatever cocktail of drugs Black Sun had been using to brainwash and enslave their victims. Most would recover, but they were looking at years of physical and psychological effects. Others, tragically, had not been so lucky. 7 of the freed prisoners had already perished from the withdrawal effects, and the doctors told her that at least a dozen more were unlikely to survive. Then there was the situation with Granta Omega and Jenna Zonarber. She didn't even want to think about either of those headaches right now. No, right now she had finally found the time to take a break and was going to the hospital to visit Naruto. She was in her handmaiden disguise, and she had somehow convinced Captain Panica that she would be safe enough without an escort. When she opened the door to Naruto's room, she was unsurprised to see him out of bed, fully clothed, and using some sort of knife to try to pry the window open. Of course, he was a poor patient. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" she asked, making him jump. He turned around and immediately greeted her with one of his strange eye smiles, not even attempting to hide his knife. "Padme. It's good to see you. Hey, can you help me with this? The stupid window's jammed shut. I can't open it." "Absolutely not. You are injured. You're supposed to be resting. Get back in that bed right now until a doctor says you can leave." "Aha, come on, Padme. I'm completely fine. Besides, hospitals suck. I don't need to be Dash. Now, Naruto. Or do I have to let Master Windu know about this?" Naruto grumbled and griped, but eventually, with her sternest glare and multiple threats, she herded him back into his bed. He glowered at her, but she just arched an eyebrow and stared back. "Don't look at me like that. I saw you when they brought you back. Shot, cut to ribbons, electrocuted, head split open, bleeding everywhere. You were nearly dead. The doctors had to put you in a Bacta tank for 10 hours. By all rights, you should still be in there. You had me, and everyone else, absolutely worried sick, so the least you can do is lie down and listen to the doctors." "Yes, Mom," he sighed. She reached out and flicked him on the ear, eliciting an indignant yelp. It wasn't especially mature, but it felt good to be a little childish after the strain of the last year. "Be polite, or I won't tell you about what's been going on," she said, confident that would get his attention. Sure enough, he perked up and looked at her pleadingly. Really, he was far too adorable for his own good sometimes. She had missed their back and forth teasing over the last few days, and it felt beyond good to relax and banter with this boy who had somehow become her friend in record time. "So, tell me. What happened to the hostages? And Dane? And Black Sun? And Dash?" "Whoa there, slow down," she laughed. "Dane will be charged with, well, basically everything there is. Murder, treason, kidnapping, conspiracy, you name it. He's awaiting trial, and I expect he'll never see the light of day again. The people you rescued have a long road ahead of them, but most will recover. I'm afraid some were already too far gone, though. The doctors did their best, but..." Naruto slumped back in his bed, his face despondent. Padme hated to see the look in his eyes, as if some small part of him had flickered and died at the news. "Hey, don't blame yourself. You did everything you could. None of those people would be alive if not for you." "Yeah, I guess," Naruto said, before he shook off his depression. "Anyway, what happened with Black Sun? Did my master get Granta and Zonarber?" Now it was Padme's turn to look grim. It was just her luck that he would ask about the one topic that was giving her the biggest headache at the moment. She was half tempted to avoid the question, but she couldn't. After everything he had done for Naboo, he deserved answers. He would find out soon enough. Zonarber got away. By the time we had secured the base, she was long gone. She's probably off planet by now. The guards captured a dozen Black Sun operatives, including a high-ranking lieutenant, as well as Granta Omega. We took them into custody, but what, Padme? What happened? Padme sighed and rubbed her temples. Chancellor Palpatine got word of it and demanded that they be extradited to Coruscant to stand trial for crimes against civilization. He wanted to make an example of them, to show that the Republic can still stand up to organized crime and corruption. I agreed and sent them on a transport, but I just got word an hour ago. The ship never made it to Coruscant. A Republic patrol ship intercepted a distress signal in the Narvath sector, but by the time they arrived, all they found was a debris field. So, they escaped then? Naruto asked, more than a hint of bitterness in voice. Padme shook her head, though. No. The investigation is ongoing, but initial scans indicated the use of illegal disruptor weapons, the sort only major crime syndicates could get a hold of. It looks like Black Sun got word of the Chancellor's plan and tied up loose ends. They both sat in silence for a while after that. It was the sort of news you just didn't know how to react to. After a minute, Naruto summed it up about as well as it could be. Well, that sucks, he said. She just nodded. There was nothing else to say about it, really. It was an ugly end to an ugly story, and that was it. She stayed and talked with him for as long as she could get away with. Her responsibilities as queen loomed in her immediate future, but for now she just relished in talking and joking with Naruto. Finally, though, she could not put off leaving any longer. As she got ready to leave, Naruto tugged on her sleeve to get her attention. Padme, could you do me a favor? After you leave, could you contact Anakin? He thinks of you as his first real friend, and I know it would mean a lot to him if he could hear from you. Padme could only stammer in surprise. The request had caught her completely off guard, though looking back, she supposed it shouldn't have. Naruto had previously expressed his disapproval of how she had never talked to Anakin after he left Naboo. He apparently took her shocked silence as indecision, because he pressed a piece of flimsy into her hands. This is the contact code for Anakin's personal holocommunicator. He and I use it to stay in touch when he's on missions. You don't have to decide now, just please think about it. Okay? Padme's hand closed automatically over the small slip. Okay, she said. I'll think about it. Think about it she did. All the way back to the palace, her thoughts kept coming back to the piece of flimsy in her pocket. Even when she was back in her role as queen, managing the storm that had arisen from the events of the past weeks, Naruto's request stayed in the back of her mind. She didn't know why she was so apprehensive about it. It wasn't as though he had asked her to take a swim with a Colorado clawfish. She supposed it was her own shame in neglecting to contact the boy who had done so much for her and her people holding her back. This is ridiculous, she thought that evening as she finally stood in front of her holotable. I faced down armed battle droids and force-wielding assassins. I will not let my own nervousness defeat me. If he's angry at me, well, it's not like I don't deserve it. She punched in the contact code and waited. It only took a few seconds before the call connected and a figure sprang to life above the table. Hey, Naruto. How's the Padme? Is that you? It took a moment before Padme recognized the person before her as Anakin Skywalker. She had known, intellectually, that he must have grown in 7 years, but seeing it for herself was still shocking. Gone was the short, round-cheeked, sandy-haired kid who she had met on Tatooine. In his place was a tall, athletic teenager, well on his way to becoming a handsome, powerfully built young man. After a few seconds, she realized that she still hadn't said anything. It's me, Ani. Naruto gave me the contact code. He and Master Windu leave tomorrow, so they should be back on Coruscant sometime after that, I guess. It's good to see you. You've certainly grown. Well, yeah. Obi-Wan says I'm going to be taller than him by the end of the year. It's great to see you. How have you been? Padme had to suppress a giggle at how adorably awkward and nervous Anakin was. It was comforting to know that she was not the only one unsure of how to talk after 7 years apart. As they slowly caught up, though, their conversation steadily became easier. Her nerves receded, and her smile became natural instead of forced. Maybe Naruto had been right, and there was still a friendship there after all. As Darth Sidious surveyed the events of the past few days, he could not stop a satisfied smile from creeping across his face. Everything had proceeded exactly as he had foreseen, a welcome return to form after the many unpleasant surprises of the past year. Despite his foolish obsession with petty revenge against the Jedi for his father's death, Granta Omega had proven himself as useful as he could have hoped. Indeed, his decision to bring in Jenna Zonarbor had paid off more than Sidious would have expected. She had been essential in giving Omega the time he needed to complete his task. The droids Omega had used against the Uzumaki boy had not merely been transmitting the data from their battle to Omega's ship. They had also, through a secret, highly encrypted, private holonet relay, transmitted the data to Sidious himself. It was a veritable treasure trove of information about the boy's current abilities, past training, and future potential. It was a pity the droids he had arranged for Omega to acquire had been destroyed, but they had served their purpose. Not only had they gathered the information he wanted, but they had proven their worth as prototypes for the elite droid unit he had tasked Darth Tyrannus with assembling. Omega had done well to leak Naruto's involvement back to Black Sunday. The organization did not tolerate humiliation, not even from Jedi. This was the second time the boy had interfered in their affairs, and they would make convenient tools to dispose of him in the future. And he would dispose of the boy. Reviewing the battle, Sidious was reluctantly impressed. He was not much now, but with only a year of training, and barely 3 months as a Padawan, Uzumaki displayed remarkable power and skill. If given a chance, he could grow into quite a threat, one whose future remained stubbornly clouded to Sidious's foresight. He would have to wait a while, probably until Windu let the boy go on a solo mission, but Uzumaki had to die. That will be for the best, though, he thought. Waiting gives me more time to study these strange powers of his. I'm sure I can replicate them, given time. Aside from gathering data on Uzumaki, the operation on Naboo had yielded a number of useful results. Palpatine had gained no small amount of sympathy as a result of the troubles on his homeworld, especially from the core senators, who feared Black Sun and organizations like it as practical bogeymen. People were now openly talking about the need for greater security and more power for the government to keep them safe. He had also weakened Amidala's position and made it more difficult for her to oppose him should she become Naboo's senator as he expected. Overall, the political gains for Palpatine had been considerable. In addition, he now had Granta Omega tucked away at the Mount Tantus facility on Wayland. As both a force blank and a gifted scientist who despised Jedi, he would no doubt prove to be a most useful asset. His research into brainwashing and mind control was especially interesting, though not immediately useful. Sidious would have liked to have acquired Zonarbor as well, but the woman had fled before he could arrange her extraction. No matter. Tyrannus can always lure her into the Separatists, he thought. Yes, the Force is with me. There may have been setbacks this past year, but they were merely opportunities in disguise. The plan is on track. I merely need patience. In a few years, Uzumaki will die, and I will rid myself of this irksome uncertainty about the future. It never occurred to Sidious that waiting to strike at Naruto might very well be a mistake. Chapter 28. 2 years later. 12 GRS, 23 BBY. Aura Singh was, without question, a dangerous woman. Once a Jedi Padawan apprenticed to the Dark Woman herself, her future had seemed bright and promising. All of that changed when pirates captured her during a mission, though. She had held out hope her master would come rescue her for months, but she never came. Instead, she had abandoned Aura, left her to rot. The years after that had been difficult, painful, and harsh. In the end, she had wound up being sold to the Anzadi assassins. Under their brutal tutelage, she had been picked apart, torn down piece by piece and rebuilt into something new. Something dangerous. A predator who would carve a bloody trail from one end of the galaxy to the other. In the years since then, she had risen to become one of the most feared and respected bounty hunters in the galaxy, one especially renowned for her success in killing Jedi. Masters, knights, Padawans, all had died at her hands, and each kill had fed her bloodlust. She now took only the most difficult, dangerous jobs, ones that promised bloodshed and violence. Her name struck fear in the hearts of trillions, and she answered to no one but herself. Thus, it was even more surprising that someone had not merely requested, but actually demanded, to meet with her. When the pathetic scug of a messenger had first dared to relay that command, she had come within a bare millimeter of shooting him dead just on principle. Only one thing had saved him: the name of his boss. Zamet Grunsight, the current underlord of Black Sun. There were very few beings that she was still wary of, but Zamet Grunsight was most definitely on that list. He controlled the most powerful criminal empire in galactic history, after all. Black Sun was the power in many portions of the galaxy. She would know, having taken jobs from them often enough before. Picking a fight with them needlessly would just be unintelligent, so she had heard the messenger out before she gutted him, the obsequious little womp rat, and had then promptly made her way to Mustafar. As the scorched lava world loomed in her viewport, she hoped that whatever job he had for her would prove interesting. She wouldn't even be able to murder him for wasting her time like she would a normal client if it turned out to be beneath her interest. Maybe she could maim a few of his lieutenants, just to maintain her rep. The beep of her incoming landing clearance shook her out of her happy thoughts. 10 minutes later, she had landed and met her escort to the Black Sun Fortress. Unlike the simpering slimo of a messenger, these were warriors. 5 of them, to be exact, armed, armored, and nervous. That was good. It meant they knew not to criff with her. Their fear tasted delicious in the Force. They also apparently knew not to make her wait. The guards led her straight to the room where Zamet and 3 of his senior Vigos were waiting, along with a few slaves. When he saw her, Zamet stood and frowned. "I hear you killed my messenger, Sing. Explain, now." Aura bristled at his imperious tone, not to mention the sheer gall to give her an order, but she restrained herself from violence. If she moved to attack anyone, she would doubtless be dead before she drew her blaster. Instead, she swallowed her pride and bit out a response. "I'm not some pet massive at your beck and call. Giving me orders, not a good idea. Besides, he was a whiny little pile of ban the shit." Zamet narrowed his eyes for a second before a smug grin crawled across his reptilian face. "You can bluster all you want, Hunter, but I notice you still came when I called. That was smart of you." A growl tried to force its way out of her throat at how self-satisfied he was, but she bit it down. In the end, he wasn't wrong. "Now, I have a job for you," he continued. "One you will take. Don't worry, though, I assure you, you'll enjoy it. There is a certain young man who has interfered in my business too often the last few years. You will kill him for me." He waved a hand, and a slave passed her a datapad. She skimmed through it, and her lips slowly parted in a predatory smile as she took in the details. Golden hair, blue eyes, some sort of cloth mask, and most important of all, a Padawan braid dangling behind his right ear. You've got yourself a deal. I'll need to hire a crew, though. For something like this, I know just the people. That's your prerogative, Zamet said. All the details are on there. We will pay double your usual rate, plus expenses. Leave no witnesses. He gestured for her to leave, and she departed with a lazy salute and a cheerful grin. Not even his relentless arrogance could dampen her good mood. It had been too long since she had gone after a Jedi. As she calculated her hyperspace jump, she even let out a low chuckle. Naruto Uzumaki, it is not your lucky day. In the 2 years since his first mission to Naboo, Naruto had taken to regularly sparring with the various Sorisu experts in the temple at least 3 times a week. Today it was Obi-Wan facing off with him in the training cell. Though not as experienced as either Master Unduli or Master Bailaba, he was already a master of Form 3. Certainly, he was more skilled than Naruto, as evidenced by him still being upright, while Naruto found himself on his back, wondering where his lightsaber had gone. I think I'm starting to memorize this ceiling, he said. I definitely spend enough time looking at it. Obi-Wan let out an amused snort. I see Anakin has passed on more of his questionable habits. If either of you dedicated as much effort to your training as you seem to do your witticisms, both of you would swiftly surpass Master Yoda. Hey! I train more than any other Padawan in the temple. I suppose you do, Obi-Wan said as he tossed him his lightsaber and helped him to his feet. Not for the first time, it struck Naruto that he and Obi-Wan were now roughly the same height. Naruto estimated he had just over a centimeter left before he passed the older man up. While Obi-Wan didn't exactly tower like Mace or Jiraiya did, Naruto still reveled in no longer being short. Even better, at 15, he still had at least one more growth spurt to look forward to. By the way, what was that last combination you used? It wasn't Sorisu, and I don't think it was Juyo either. Naruto shrugged and looked away, trying to project an air of casual nonchalance. That was something he had wanted to keep to himself, at least for a while longer. Judging by the way Obi-Wan's eyebrows quirked, he hadn't quite pulled it off. He considered just remaining silent on the matter, but he quickly dismissed that idea. Obi-Wan's eyebrows could pry information out of anyone. They ought to be studied. After a second, he sighed and tried for prevarication. It's just something I've been working on. In my spare time, you know. It isn't ready yet, though, obviously. Obi-Wan stared at him for a long minute before he gave a small nod. Naruto couldn't sense anything concrete from him. His shields were too good for that, but he thought the older man had guessed more than he was letting on. Still, if he wasn't going to press, then Naruto wasn't going to worry about it. We still have some time, Naruto. Care for another round? Under ordinary circumstances, Naruto would have said yes without hesitation. However, even as Obi-Wan offered, he sensed a familiar sunburst of emotions through the force heading his way. With the distinct mix of eager happiness, stubborn resolve, and boundless confidence, all backed up by a faint thrum of hunting instincts, Ahsoka may as well have shouted her presence with a loudspeaker. For some reason, he could always sense her more easily than just about anyone else in the temple, nearly as easily as he could sense Master Windu, in fact. He could tell someone else with her, too, but he couldn't tell who it was. It didn't matter, though. The game was on. Sorry, but I think Ahsoka's looking for me. Say hi to Anakin for me and tell him he still owes me 10 credits. Why does he owe you? Obi-Wan started, but it was too late. Naruto was already out the door. As he felt her getting closer, he scuttled up the walls and onto the ceiling, flattening himself into the shadow of a pillar. As she passed underneath him, he dropped, aiming to land behind her. It was a game they had been playing for over a year now, seeing who could successfully ambush the other whenever the opportunity presented itself. As he fell silently through the air, it looked like he was going to win again. She hadn't even glanced up once, and his hasty plan was going perfectly, right until he felt the force grab hold of him and suspend him 2 meters off the ground. Ahsoka turned around with holodrama slowness, one hand held out in front of her, a triumphant grin plastered across her face. Said face was framed by an Akul tooth headdress, a mark of prowess for any Togruta. It was not the only change Ahsoka had made to her outfit in the last 2 years. Gone was her traditional Jedi tunic, and its place was a much less restrictive garment. It consisted of a maroon tube top that left her stomach bare, a matching short skirt with a purple Togruta sash on the front, white leggings, and tall, maroon boots. She also wore a set of maroon fingerless gloves and forearm warmers. Overall, she cut a very different, though no less fearsome figure than she had 2 years earlier. Really, Naruto? Dropping from the ceiling. That's just sad. You can do better than that. Naruto just smiled at her. While she focused on him, the Kage Bunshin he'd made earlier dropped silently behind her and leaned right next to her left mantril. I did, it whispered as it poked her in the side. Ahsoka yelped and jumped a solid meter into the air. It would have been hilarious had she not also lost her force hold on Naruto. Instead of enjoying the startled look on his best friend's face, Naruto instead let out a shocked yelp of his own as he landed on the floor in an unruly heap. From that less than dignified position, he heard a quiet, familiar voice. Are you two okay? He glanced up and quickly zeroed in on the source of the question. Oh, hey Vire. When did you get here? Seriously, Naruto? Ahsoka asked, having returned from her brief flight. She was with me the whole time. How is it you sensed me from halfway across the temple, but you didn't notice Vire even when she was literally right in front of your face? Naruto scrambled to his feet and drew whatever was left of his dignity around him like a cloak. Well, your shields are crap, Sokka. Vire's are a lot better. They actually exist, for one. Ahsoka growled, a low, trilling rumble that no human could replicate, and flashed her fangs at him. Hey, there's nothing wrong with my shields. Whatever you say, Sokka. Naruto raised his hands placatingly. Now, why are you two here? Shouldn't you be studying for your Padawan trials? Ahsoka, ever kind and gracious, snorted like an Eopie. You, of all people, are going to get on us about studying? Really? Naruto just fixed her with his best deadpan stare. 2 years with Master Windu now paid off when she immediately shivered and backpedaled. Okay, sorry. Force, you're getting way too good at that. Anyway, that's sort of why we're here. With the trials coming up at the end of the week, Vair wanted more hand-to-hand combat practice. She asked me, and I, sort of decided, to enlist me? Only if you're not too busy, Vair said, shuffling her feet and trying not to look nervous. I don't want to bother you. Naruto frowned and cocked his head to the side. What are you talking about, Vair? You're not bothering me. She is dash, he gestured at Ahsoka, who bristled with false outrage, but you're not. The smaller girl looked away, an embarrassed blush turning her ears red. Her voice dropped to a near whisper, and only Naruto's hyperacute hearing let him make out what she was saying. It's just, you're a Padawan now, and you go on missions with Master Windu and everything. I'm sure you've got a bunch more important things to do than help me out. It's really not that big of a deal. By the time she had finished talking, her voice was nearly inaudible and her gaze was glued firmly to her feet. Naruto could sense the nervousness and shame whirling inside of her, even through her shields. He shot a discreet glance at Ahsoka, who nodded minutely, before reaching out and gently grabbing Vair by the shoulders. With such close contact, the storm of failure, shame, to weak no tready, and stay quiet, notoburden echoed loudly in his mind. Only his training with Ayla on how to control his empathic powers and insulate his mind kept him from wincing. Vair, please look at me, he said, careful to keep his voice calm and soft. Slowly, reluctantly, Vair raised her head to meet his gaze. Her eyes glimmered with repressed tears, and she sniffled. I want you to listen to me carefully. Helping you is the more important thing. A small spark of hope flickered within her Force presence. Really? Really? You're not a burden, you're not a bother, and you're not weak. You're my clanmate and my friend. I told you when I became a Padawan that wouldn't change, and I meant it. I would be thrilled to help you train for your trials. Would you like that? Vair nodded once, more a jerk of her head than anything else, before she launched herself forward and wrapped her arms around him. Naruto readily returned the embrace and projected happy, calm and warm, safe as hard as he could. If any of the nearby knights and masters shot him a stern look for the blatant display of emotion, he ignored them. After a minute spent burrowed into his robes, Vair finally pulled back. Her eyes were a little red, but they were free of tears, and her Force presence screamed embarrassment over her outburst more than anything else. Most importantly, a small smile had made its way onto her face. Satisfied, Naruto ruffled her hair and gestured down the hall. How about you go find an empty training cell and get warmed up, okay? We'll be there in a minute. The now shyly grinning girl nodded and scampered off, no doubt eager to regain her composure away from prying eyes. Once she rounded the corner and moved out of sight, Ahsoka walked up next to him and bumped him with her shoulder. Thanks, Goldie, she said, using her latest nickname for him. She needed that. How long has she been stewing like that? Ahsoka hesitated for a long moment before answering. I don't actually know. I didn't notice until a few days ago when it got bad. I should have seen it sooner, though. She's probably been nervous for weeks. I should have seen it sooner. Now it was Naruto's turn to bump her with his shoulder. Hey, don't you go beating yourself up, too. You had your own trials to worry about, and Vair's always been good about keeping stuff like this to herself. You noticed, and now you're helping. That's what matters. She shot him a grateful look and leaned her head against his shoulder, using him as a pillow. It was a habit she had developed years ago. When he'd asked, she'd just said he was warm and sounded nice. Naruto wasn't entirely sure what that meant, but he decided to take it as a compliment. For a pleasant minute they just stood there, enjoying each other's company and the feel of each other's Force presence. Occasionally, she would give his Padawan braid, which now extended down to his shoulder, a gentle flick. After a while, though, Naruto gave her a gentle shake. Come on, we'd better go before Vair thinks we abandoned her. Ahsoka looked at him quizzically. What do you mean we? Naruto gave her his most self-satisfied eye smile. What, you thought you could just rope me into this and run for the flight simulators? Criff, No. You're helping me, like it or not. Besides, your hand-to-hand isn't exactly awe-inspiring. Don't worry, though. I'll whip you both into shape. While my hand-to-hand is just goldy, you dash, Ahsoka sputtered as he took off in the same direction Vair had gone. Get back here. I am so going to clobber you. Naruto just laughed, and she raced after him, determined to teach him a lesson. If they stumbled into the cell Vair had chosen already a little breathless and disheveled, and if Naruto was rubbing a swiftly reddening ear, as if it had been firmly pinched by a pair of sharp-nailed, orange fingers, well, that was just the sort of friends they were. After an hour of sparring and katas, Naruto had determined that Vair's biggest problem was, perhaps unsurprisingly, confidence. She might not have been the most skilled fighter in the Clawmouse clan, but she was still above the standard for new Padawans. The problem was, she refused to see it. She was so convinced of her own inadequacy at fighting that she was subconsciously sabotaging her own technique. He might have admired her stubbornness had it not been the very thing causing her problems. Since it was, Naruto resorted to the oldest and most reliable method of dealing with stubborn students, the one that all of his teachers had used on him over the years. Endless, exhausting repetition. Again, faster. Vair rolled out of her fall and struggled to her feet. Her slight frame dripped with sweat and her breath came in rapid pants, but her stance was strong and her arms were steady. Ahsoka signaled them to start, and he wasted no time in aiming a low, sweeping kick at her legs. She jumped over it and snapped her own kick out at his head. When he blocked it, he was pleasantly surprised that she was indeed faster this time, despite her exhaustion. Fast enough that he couldn't grab hold of her leg before she retracted it and followed up with a punch to his liver. With a smile hidden beneath his mask, Naruto twisted around it and gave her arm a yank, tugging her off balance. Before she could recover, he had her locked in a chokehold with one arm twisted behind her back. She struggled valiantly for a few seconds, before the increasing pressure on her carotid arteries forced her to forfeit or risk passing out. Again, Vair. Don't hesitate before you follow up this time. She looked up at him from rubbing her tender throat and gave him a glare. It was actually a little shocking to see sweet, shy Vair, who never raised her voice, actually try to glare a hole in his head. What's the point of this, Naruto? I'm not getting anywhere. Kami, is this what I sounded like when Kakashi-sensei first trained me? Naruto thought. In the end, he decided he probably didn't want to follow that train of thought further, and tried to channel the wisdom of his teachers. Both Jiraiya and Mace were big believers in confronting problems directly, and Naruto saw no reason to stray from their well-trod path. It had worked for him, and there was no way Vair was as bantha-headed as he had once been. You're wrong, Naruto said, flicking Vair in the forehead to emphasize his point. She squawked in protest, but it got her attention. You've been improving this whole time, but dash. Vair, have I made the same correction twice so far? She frowned, thinking back. Well, no, that's because I haven't had to. You haven't made the same mistake twice. When you dodged my first counter last match, I didn't let you do that. You earned it. You've already improved, and you were plenty good enough to start with. Vair made a face as if to protest, but Ahsoka cut her off. Naruto's right. Your skills are fine. You need to stop worrying so much. Vair looked back and forth between the two, her mouth moving silently. She looked completely lost, and Naruto could sense the confusion and denial blanketing her thoughts. But you two are both so much better at this than me. I'm always last in sparring, and you can beat me without even trying, and ow. What was that for? Naruto interrupted her with another flick to the forehead and smiled at her reaction. For being a nerf stubborn space brain. Listen, Master Windu has a saying. The only person you should compare yourself to is the person you were yesterday. So what if Ahsoka or I are better fighters than you? We're both going to be guardians. Fighting's our specialty. You're way better than us at diplomacy, and history, and all sorts of other things. Okay? He looked at her expectantly, trying to see if his words had sunk in. Outside of a few stints at creche duty with the younger clans, and his few times coaching Konohamaru, Naruto had very little experience mentoring anyone. It felt like she was starting to accept what he was saying, but he wasn't sure. She still seemed hung up on something. But, the Padawan trials? What if I'm not good enough? Force, didn't you hear Ahsoka and me? Naruto moaned with a put-upon sigh. You'll be fine. You were already good enough before we started. Your only issue was confidence. Vair frowned and opened her mouth to respond, but Naruto silenced her with a look, another skill he had picked up from his master. I swear, if you try to disagree with me, I'll just flick you again. Got it? Vair pouted at him for a few seconds before she rolled her eyes and huffed. Fine. If you say so. But, well, can we keep sparring? I miss spending time with you. Of course. I'd like that. The smile Vair gave him was smaller than her earlier one, but the pure delight in it shone all the brighter. She crossed the short distance between them and gave him a tight hug. Thank you, Naruto nii, she whispered in Nihongo. Naruto stiffened in surprise for a moment before he returned the embrace even tighter. His eyes stung a little, and his breathing was shaky. Until now, only Anakin had called him his brother. He had long since considered Vair a little sister, but to have those feelings return so openly was an unexpected, but cherished, surprise. You're welcome, Vair-chan, he whispered back in the same language. Now, let's beat each other up. She giggled at that and stepped back into a ready stance. Before they could start, though, Ahsoka dragged Vair over into a corner. You two have had your heart-to-heart, Naruto. Now it's my turn, she said in response to his unspoken question. Vair looked equally confused, but didn't protest as she marched her across the room. Ahsoka whispered something in her ear, too low for even Naruto to catch. Vair giggled and whispered back. If that wasn't suspicious enough, both of them had raised their mental shields as high as they could, keeping him from sensing their emotions unless he forced it. What are you two planning? He asked when the two of them had turned back towards him. Their shields were still up, but their mischievous grins told a story all their own. Oh, nothing, Ahsoka said, in what was perhaps the least genuine tone he had ever heard. Get to sparring. We don't have all day. Naruto tried his best deadpan stare, but she managed to remain strong this time. With a resigned snort, he took his position for the spar. Whatever was going on, prying it out of the girls would be like pulling Gundark teeth. In his experience, 50,000 years and a whole species of separation hadn't changed the fact that girls were mysterious, scary, and just plain weird. Ready, begin. As soon as Ahsoka called the start, Vair was in motion. With her earlier worries assuaged, if perhaps not completely gone, her form was much more graceful. The split-second hesitation that had crippled her technique earlier was gone, replaced by a tentative confidence. The last thing Naruto wanted to do was destroy her newfound faith in her abilities, so he deliberately held back. Rather than use his superior speed and skill to force an opening, he allowed her to demonstrate, to herself as much as him, the new tricks and techniques he had taught her. They traded blows back and forth for several minutes, more enjoying the activity than actually trying to win. Just when Naruto thought he had been mistaken, and the girls hadn't been planning anything after all, they sprung their trap. He was about to launch into a double spin kick combo when he felt a bunch of invisible hands grab onto him and hold him fast. A familiar force signature accompanied the sudden attack. Ahsoka, what the hell? Vair, get him. He could hear the smirk in her voice. His newfound little sister promptly transformed into a tiny, brown-clothed rocket aimed straight at his legs. With a burst of power, he broke free of Ahsoka's force hold, but it was too late. Before he could dodge Vair's tackle, a pair of skinny orange arms wrapped around his chest and pinned him in place. Vair slammed into his legs, and they all went tumbling to the ground in a tangle of laughter and limbs. When he finally disentangled himself and pinned both of the others to the mats, Naruto stood triumphantly. You two are a pair of incorrigible pests, he said. But you're both ready for the Padawan trials. 1 week later. The Padawan trials went as well as Naruto could have hoped. All of his former clanmates had done well at the various tests. Vair had even won several of her sparring matches, much to her surprise. She and the rest of them were now sequestered, preparing for the gathering and learning how to build their lightsabers. Naruto was busy with Jiraiya, practicing his elemental manipulation. He had long since progressed past cutting simple duraplast, and now was in the room of 1,000 fountains, trying to split one of the larger waterfalls. He had stationed half a dozen clones around the room at other waterfalls, practicing the same exercise. He had managed to get almost halfway through the largest waterfall when he felt a familiar nudge at the back of his mind. Naruto, report to the council chambers. There is something we need to discuss with you. Jiraiya must have noticed his lapse in focus, because he tossed a pebble at his head. Pay attention, brat. You'll never get this down if you keep losing focus. Naruto tossed the pebble right back at his mentor. It made a clink as it bounced off his forehead protector. What's the big idea, Baka-sensei? I didn't lose focus, Master Windu was talking to me. He dodged another pebble. Oi, stop that. What's that one for? Being disrespectful, brat, Jiraiya said with a grin. Naruto just stuck his tongue out and made a rude gesture. Very mature. Now spill. What did Mace have to say? Apparently, the council wants to talk with me. He told me to report to the tower right away. Oh, Jiraiya said, grinning knowingly. What did you do this time? You didn't traumatize another class of younglings, did you? Naruto sputtered with outrage. I didn't do anything, this time. And those kids had a great time. They learned a lot. It's not my fault their creche master was such a stick in the mud. Jiraiya just shook his head. So, what do they want you for, then? I don't know. Master Yoda didn't say anything to you? He tries to keep me out of council business, Jiraiya said. Can't imagine why. Naruto rolled his eyes. The council may have softened their stance on things such as relationships and emotions over the years, but only slightly. It had been more of a tacit relaxing of the stricter rules rather than any formal change in doctrine. No doubt Jiraiya had been making a nuisance of himself again, trying to speed up the changes he had started. Naruto wasn't about to get involved. The politics of the council were, if anything, even less interesting to him than the politics of the Senate. It wasn't like he had ever really followed the code when it came to attachment or emotion, anyway. You'd better get going, Jiraiya said. Don't want to keep the council waiting, even if it is fun watching Taiyan's face twitch. Naruto nodded and dispelled his clones. The sudden rush of information had him shaking his head, but it passed after a moment. Those clones had been active for most of the morning, so the combined strain was noticeable, but hardly debilitating. Once he had filed the fresh memories away, he crossed his fingers and made 10 more Kagebunshin. Go to the archives and study those binary linguistics textbooks Master Windu assigned me. Dispel when you're done and don't piss off Master Nu this time. She threatened to ban me after that crap with the monkey lizards. Fortunately, there didn't appear to be any oddballs in this batch of shadow clones. They all saluted as one before disappearing in a blur of shunshin. Naruto took the time to wave a quick farewell to Jiraiya before he used a shunshin of his own to vanish from the room. After a quick stop at his quarters to change into fresh robes, Naruto headed to the council chambers. When he arrived, the doors were already open, and Master Poof called him in right away. Thank you for coming, Naruto, the Quirmian Master of the Order said in his thin, reedy voice. We have something to discuss with you. Am I in trouble? Naruto asked. He didn't think he was, but no one had ever lost money betting that the council was upset with him for something. Not the whole council, typically, but Master Taiyan and Master Rancisis could both usually find something to grumble about. Right on cue, Master Taiyan spoke up. Is there some reason you should be in trouble, Padawan? His gaze bored into Naruto, who determinedly kept his face blank. He'd been dealing with the uptight Itachi master for years now, and had learned not to rise to the man's confrontational attitude. I don't think so, Master. Your boots aren't squeaking again, are they? Usually. A soft ripple of laughter spread across the room, accompanied by the clear, bell-like ring of amusement from several of the counselors. Taiyan stared at him blankly for a few seconds before he let out a rueful snort. Fair enough, he said. Naruto dipped his head in a small bow to acknowledge their verbal spar. Contrary to his master's frequent complaints, he did have some grasp of maturity and politeness. Your wit remains sharp as ever, young Naruto, but I fear we have important business to discuss, said Master Poof. Naruto immediately straightened and returned his focus to the venerable Quirmian, the picture of Jedi calm and professionalism. Thank you. Master Yoda? No, you do, that passed their Padawan trials your former clanmates have. In 3 days, leave for the gathering they will. Accompany them, you will. Their guide you shall be, yes. It took a few moments for Naruto to realize what Yoda was saying. Gatherings traditionally took place aboard the Crucible, and were only accompanied by a single guide. That couldn't be right, though. If he was going to be that guide, that meant. You mean I'm going alone? Naruto asked, too shocked for manners. This'll be my first solo mission? Yes, Padawan, Mace said. The council has decided you are ready for such a responsibility. I've decided you are ready, he sent over their bond. The feelings of trust and confidence that accompanied the words would have settled warmly in Naruto's chest, had he not been so busy trying not to panic. But I've only been a Padawan for 2 years. Aren't solo missions for senior Padawans? As he struggled to rein in his shock at the unexpected assignment, he felt the comforting touch of Master Deppa Bilaba brushing against his shields. Naruto, you have shown remarkable skill and maturity, despite your relatively brief time as a Padawan. Your actions on Chandrila and Quat, as well as your dedication to your training at the temple, have all garnered notice. The galaxy is becoming a more and more dangerous place every day, Plo-kun said. The Jedi are already spread thin, trying to maintain the peace. In such times, I fear we must ask you to step up and assume greater responsibility, tradition notwithstanding. Naruto took a deep, calming breath, and released his anxiety into the Force as best he could. With the initial surprise over, he could see only one real option. Never once had he balked at a challenge, and he wasn't about to start now. I accept, Masters. I won't let you down. Good, said Master Poof. You will leave in 3 days to rendezvous with the Crucible. May the Force be with you. As the council filed out of the room, a signal from Mace had him walking into an antechamber down the hall. To his mild surprise, Deppa joined them as well. As soon as they were all in the room, Mace wasted no time in speaking. I sense you are nervous about this mission. Why? Naruto paused before answering and tried to order his thoughts. He wasn't entirely sure how to articulate what he was feeling, but he tried anyway. I've never been on my own before. Even back in Konoha, I never ran a mission by myself. I never even led a team. I've made tough decisions before, sure, but it's never come down to just you? Deppa finished, her voice kind and soothing. Naruto nodded, and she laid a hand on his elbow. I can remember feeling the same way before my first solo mission. Most Jedi do, especially those who already know how high the stakes can be. Just know that you are ready, and you can handle this. Mace nodded. It's good to acknowledge your fears and get them in the open. Fear thrives in darkness and secrecy. When we admit our fear, it loses the power to control us. You really think I'm ready for this? Naruto asked. Mace looked him straight in the eyes and nodded. I do, Padawan. You have much to learn and you often drive me to distraction, but you have never disappointed me. In time, you will become a great Jedi Knight. This is just another step on that journey. Remember what I have taught you, and you should perform adequately. While they may have seemed cold to most, Naruto could sense the warmth and conviction behind his master's words. Mace was rarely one to display open emotion, but over the last 2 years, Naruto had learned the subtle cues he used to show friendship and affection. His trust was difficult to earn, and it meant a lot to Naruto that Mace had such faith in his abilities. It should have calmed his worries, and to some extent, it did. However, he couldn't shake the lingering feeling of dread he had about being on his own for this mission. This is stupid, he thought. I haven't let fear control me since my first mission outside of the village. There's no way I'm going to start now. Not when everyone believes in me so much. With that in mind, he smiled and bowed his head in gratitude. Mace excused himself to take care of an overdue report to the Senate about their last mission, leaving him and Deppa alone in the room. He could feel her gaze on him without even looking, warm, yet eerily perceptive. Over the last few years, she had become something of a confidant of his. He had often gone to her for advice, seeking a different, and sometimes gentler, point of view than that of his master. As such, she could read him better than most, sometimes even better than Mace himself. Judging by the gentle concern he could see in her eyes, it seemed this was one of those times. You hide your feelings well, Naruto, she said. Better than most would credit you with. But I can still sense your trepidation. You can talk to me. Perhaps I can help. Naruto grimaced. I don't even know what the problem is. It's stupid. I shouldn't be afraid. I know I can handle this. It's just, ugh, I don't know. Something just feels wrong. HHMM. Deppa looked at him for a moment, and then pulled him into one of her rare embraces. Naruto let himself relax into the comforting warmth and released his pent-up tension with a deep sigh. His fists unclenched and his shoulders relaxed as the stress drained out of him. You know, just because this is a solo mission doesn't mean you have to go through every part of it on your own. Naruto pulled back and gave her a puzzled look. What do you mean? Ever since I've known you, you've drawn strength from your friends. Perhaps you should do so now. Go to them. Talk to them. You may find they can provide answers you can't see. Even if they cannot, I think you'll find that a little comfort before a frightening task goes further than you might think. Naruto stood stock still for a moment as he processed her words. Finally, he groaned and slapped himself on the forehead. Arf. Force, I'm such an idiot. Why didn't I think of that? Deppa gave him an impish smile. I believe you just answered your own question. Oi! I thought you council members were supposed to be all stoic and professional, Naruto said in mock outrage. Isn't making fun of a lowly Padawan beneath you? First of all, there's nothing lowly about you anymore, Naruto, she said as she looked up at him. It was true. Deppa was not a tall woman, and Naruto stood nearly a head taller than her. Second, while mocking a Padawan would be frowned upon, bantering with a friend is hardly going to be censured. Upon hearing that, Naruto gave her a brilliant eye smile. He didn't think it would ever get old, being reminded that he had friends now. Lots of friends. For someone who had grown up almost completely alone, it was sometimes hard to believe it wasn't all a dream. Unbidden, his thoughts turned to his old comrades from Konoha. As always, the memories came with a stab of grief, but the thought of what he had gained since then dulled the pain of their loss. Though they were all long dead, the memory of his lost friends lived on in the new bonds he had forged. Thank you for the advice, Master. He bowed his head. And thank you for being my friend. I promise I'll make you all proud. You always have, Naruto. You always have. The next day, Naruto found himself in the Senate building, in the office of an old friend, Padme Amidala. Shortly after her term as queen had expired, she had taken up the post as Naboo's senator. Since then, she had become a staunch supporter of the Jedi Order, as well as a personal friend to several of its members. It was for that last reason Naruto had come. You know, I really shouldn't have even bothered to ask Ayla where you were, Anakin. You spend practically every spare moment you have here, he said as he walked in. Sure enough, the older Padawan was in the office, talking with Padme. Is there something you want to tell me? Now, Naruto wasn't entirely sure what was going on between the two of them, and he wasn't about to seriously ask. He had his suspicions, ones backed up by the complex tangle of powerful emotions they both projected when they were around each other, but there were some things he felt he was better off not knowing. He didn't have words strong enough to describe how much he didn't want to get in the middle of that part of his older brother's life. Still, he wasn't about to pass up such a golden opportunity for teasing. Honestly, the wisecracks practically wrote themselves, and he needed some comic relief. He even added an extra waggle to his eyebrows, just to drive the point home. To his immense satisfaction, Anakin immediately turned pink. Surprisingly, though, so did Padme. She was better at hiding it, but he definitely spotted a faint blush on her cheeks in response to his joke. Now that was interesting, and definitely worth filing away for later. If his time spent with Jiraiya had taught him anything, it was to never pass up dirt on your friends. While Padme managed to more or less keep her composure, Anakin was reduced to a red-faced, spluttering mess. You are not Naruto, what are you doing here? Annie, don't be rude, Padme gently chided him. Naruto, are you alright? You look stressed. Is something wrong? How the hell do girls know shit like that? Naruto wondered. I know I'm not that easy to read. The mysteries of feminine intuition would have to wait, though, because Padme had that look in her eyes, and woe betide anyone who didn't answer her when she had that look. It's nothing serious, really. I just needed to talk to Anakin really quick. Her skeptical frown, accompanied by a surge of worry and disbelief, told him exactly what she thought of his flimsy excuses, but he ignored her in favor of Anakin. His brother seemed to have forgotten his prior indignation in favor of curiosity and moved around the desk to face him. "What's up? You in trouble with the council again? I heard you got called up there suddenly yesterday. Why does everyone always assume I'm in trouble?" Naruto rolled his eyes while Anakin and Padme both smothered giggles. "No, don't answer that. I'm not in any trouble. Kinda the opposite, actually. You know the gathering coming up in a couple of days?" Anakin nodded. "Yeah. What does that have to do with dash?" He paused and gave Naruto a stunned look. "No? Really? Yep, already? That's wow." Ahem, Padme cleared her throat and gave them both pointed looks. "Would either of you care to fill me in on what the blazes you're talking about?" "Oh, right. Sorry." Naruto scratched his head in embarrassment. "The council gave me my first solo mission yesterday." She blinked in surprise for a moment before breaking out into a huge grin. "Naruto, congratulations. That's wonderful." Her smile faded a bit, then, and she paused for a moment before continuing. "No offense, though, but aren't you a little young for something like that?" "Oh no, he's definitely young for his first solo mission," Anakin said. "I only got my first one 2 months ago." "Master Windu must really believe in you," Naruto grimaced. "Yeah. I don't know if I'm ready. I mean, I know I'm ready. I just don't feel ready, you know? Hey, you'll do fine." Anakin clapped him on the shoulder. "I heard Master Windu let you take point during that guild dispute on Quat. If you could handle that, then a gathering should be easy. Not to mention how you handled yourself on Chandrila," Padme said. "Senator Mothma told me how you helped end the insurrection there without a single life lost." Naruto sighed. "Yeah. The council pretty much said the same thing." "Well, as much as I hate to compliment the council, they're usually pretty smart about this sort of thing," Anakin said with a grin, before his face turned serious. "Have you talked to Jiraiya about this? He usually gives pretty good advice." "I did, but it didn't really help. He's been running missions on his own for decades. I don't know if he even remembers what it was like to be a rookie. He just told me I was ready, and that it was just nerves." "Well, he's not wrong," Anakin said apologetically. "When I went on my first solo mission, I was damn near having a panic attack the whole time. I was worried about making Obi-Wan proud, worried about screwing up the mission, and just worried because being on my own was new and weird. I'm pretty sure everyone gets nervous before their first solo mission. It'll be fine." "You should listen to him, Naruto," Padme said. "I know he doesn't act like it most of the time, but Anakin knows what he's talking about. Usually. About some stuff." "Hey!" Padme and he couldn't help but laugh at the outraged expression on Anakin's face. After a moment, Anakin joined them, and Naruto slowly let the tension ease from his mind. As they passed the next hour bantering, joking, and, in Anakin and Padme's case, gently flirting, he forgot all about his former worry. Deppa had been right about how much strength he drew from his friends. Eventually, though, Padme began herding them towards the door, pleading that her workload needed her attention. "What are you working on, anyway?" Naruto asked. "You've been even busier than usual lately." She sighed and rubbed the bridge of her nose, while Anakin squeezed her other hand in support. "It's this separatist movement. Ever since Count Dooku made his speech on Raxus last year, it seems as if the whole Republic is falling apart. More systems join his cause every day. The commerce guilds are inflaming the situation, and few in the Senate seem to care for diplomacy. The Military Creation Act is on the table again, and a depressing number of senators seem in favor of it this time." Naruto grimaced. Padme had mentored him in galactic politics, but it remained an unpleasant topic for him. There was too much sneaking around and backstabbing for his taste, and he was a former shinobi. Despite his distaste, though, he could read the current climate. "Don't those idiots know that raising an army right now will only lead to war?" Anakin voiced his exact thoughts before he could. "I'm going to go talk to the Chancellor. Maybe he can get them to see reason." Naruto, good luck on your mission, and may the Force be with you. Anakin left in a swirl of cloaks and indignation, while Padme shook her head fondly. She gave Naruto a hug, wished him luck, and then gently shooed him out of her office, though not before extracting a promise from him to visit again once he got back. Out in the hall, Naruto inhaled deeply and smiled. He felt refreshed and ready to face his upcoming mission. When the time came for the Clawmouse clan to leave for the gathering, Naruto woke up well before dawn in order to get to the shuttle before any of the others. He hadn't bothered to inform them of his assignment, and he was very much looking forward to their reactions. Sure enough, when they walked into the hangar, bleary-eyed and drowsy from the early morning, they stopped in their tracks upon seeing him. Naruto, why are you here?" Ahsoka asked with a confused look. The others with her, Barriss Zvair, Trilla Sidori, Nox, and Guldo Stuff all seemed equally puzzled. Naruto gave his brightest eye smile and clapped loudly to make sure they were all paying attention. "Didn't you hear? I'm your guy's guide for the gathering. But, where is Master Windu?" Nox asked. "If you're coming, shouldn't he be here too?" "Nope. It's just me. The council made this my first solo mission." That caused a bit of a stir. Even Guldos, who was normally as expressive as a brick wall, widened his eyes and twitched his quills at the news. Nox's gills fluttered in excitement, while Trilla gasped in surprise. Vair and Barriss both smiled and congratulated him. Ahsoka, however, just groaned dramatically and palmed her forehead. "They trusted you to go out on your own," she said, though she was clearly trying to suppress a grin. "Great. We're doomed," Ahsoka, Barriss hissed, scandalized. "Don't be mean. I'm sure Naruto will do fine, or the council wouldn't have given him the mission. I mean, come on," Ahsoka continued, as if Barriss hadn't interrupted her. "They couldn't find anyone else. Farron's a Padawan now, isn't he? Couldn't he take us?" "Ha ha ha," Naruto said as he rolled his eyes. "Hilarious, Ahsoka. You done?" She tapped her chin, as if contemplating some deep mystery. Yeah. I'm done. Nice job on getting a solo mission. Try not to get us lost or anything?" Naruto just shook his head. "Stars, Anakin really has it right with his nickname for you, huh? Maybe. But you're not going to use it, are you, Naruto?" Ahsoka's smile was dazzling. It also did an excellent job of showing off her wickedly sharp fangs. Naruto had to suppress a shudder. "Anyway, we're burning daylight." "Sort of. Can you use that expression if the sun isn't up yet?" "Whatever. Just get in the shuttle." "Barriss, you be co-pilot." "How come Barriss gets to be co-pilot?" Ahsoka objected. "Because she was nice to me." "Sorry, Vair, but I've seen you fly." "I choose life." Ahsoka pouted, and his little sister chuckled sheepishly as he herded his former clanmates onto the shuttle. Once they were all on board and strapped in, he fired up the engines and piloted them out of the hangar. As the pre-dawn cobalt of the sky swiftly gave way to the infinite black of space, he angled them towards the small Jedi spaceyard. There, amidst the various hyperspace rings and training modules, sat the Crucible. An ancient Paladin-class corvette, it had served as a Jedi training vessel for over a millennium. It could technically dock at the temple, but with Coruscant traffic, Naruto had decided that a shuttle would be faster. "Alright guys," Naruto said as he docked with the larger ship. "This is where the fun begins." That's the end of the chapter. But wait, there's more. As stated above, the following omake is canon to the story. It takes place as several months before the events of this chapter. Omake, Ahsoka's Hunt 1. On the morning of her 13th birthday, Ahsoka Tano woke up not expecting much. Jedi put little stock in celebrating things like birthdays and holidays, nor did they often give or receive gifts. For the most part, Ahsoka was fine with that. She thought it was silly how most beings were so attached to physical possessions. To her, people were what mattered, and her friends most of all. So, when Barriss gave her a tight hug without any prompting, or when Vair asked to partner with her in flight training later that day, even though no one ever wanted to be her partner because she flew like a swivel-eyed mimic with a death wish or something, she basked in a warm feeling of contentment. The only thing that was missing was her best friend. Every year since he had first arrived at the temple, he had done something special with her to celebrate her birthday. Admittedly, the first time had involved a terrifying journey through the monster-infested bowels of Coruscant and concluded with a death-defying fight against a group of vicious slavers, but it had still been special. This year, however, Naruto was off on a mission with Master Windu. It sucked, but such was the life of a Jedi. Missions always came first. A brief flicker of jealousy curdled in her stomach before she banished it. Soon, Ahsoka told herself. Soon I'll be a Padawan and go on missions too. That mantra had kept her going ever since Naruto had come back from Ilum with a lightsaber hanging at his side. It had driven her to push herself right to her limits and beyond, to the point where she now competed with or beat Barris for the top spot in every class. She had sworn she would stand beside Naruto as they became Jedi, and no way was she going to let her infuriating, stubborn, wonderful, goofy prankster of a best friend beat her. It still would have been nice if he were there for her birthday, though. To her surprise, when she got back from the clan's early morning exercise and went to change, she found a gift nestled on top of her fresh tunic, a gift that definitely had not been there when she woke up in the morning. A gift that, judging by the bright orange wrapping, had somehow come from her aforementioned doofus of a best friend. A best friend who was, and had been for 4 days, over 20,000 light years away. How that sneaky punk. She shook her head, unable to keep a smile from tugging at her lips. Programming a temple droid just to surprise me with a present. Only you, Naruto. When she tore open the wrapping, to her utter lack of surprise, she found a scroll covered in 4 seals. Of course, he'd seal my presents up. Stars forbid either of us ever do anything normally. With a half-second's focus, she pulled the force into her body and generated chakra. As she expected, the first seal contained a sizable bag of Ronto jerky. No matter what else he got her, Naruto always included a bag of her favorite snack on her birthday. The second seal contained another scroll, somewhat smaller than the first. When she unrolled it, Ahsoka saw it held the instructions on a Katan Jutsu, written in Nihongo. Katan, Gokakyu no Jutsu, she read off the top. Wizard. When she unlocked the third seal, a data card appeared on top of the scroll. The tiny disc, small enough to sit comfortably in her palm, looked innocent enough, but she eyed it warily. Given that it came from Naruto, it could contain anything from a heartwarming birthday message to a mantra-splitting Gamorrean poetry recitation. She'd seen him use data cards just like this one in his pranks a dozen times. Naruto didn't claim the title of most unpredictable Padawan ever for no reason, and even Ahsoka knew to look for a prank behind his every twitch and whisper. She didn't think he'd prank her on her birthday, but she also hadn't thought anyone could turn every light in the Senate Rotunda orange, and stars, had he ever proved her wrong about that. Deciding that discretion was the better part of valor, she gingerly set the data card to one side and tried to open the fourth and final seal. Unlike the first 3, though, it stubbornly refused to unlock. She tried again, channeling more and more chakra, until she was actually out of breath from the strain, but the seal remained stubbornly unresponsive. Fear fact. When she looked closer at the last seal, she noticed it looked a little different from the others. Ahsoka knew next to nothing about the sealing arts, particularly compared to a growing expert like Naruto, but she thought there was a blank space on the central array, as if some of the symbols were missing. There were also extra arm thingies, radials, Naruto had called them, spiraling off from the main body of the seal. She had no idea what it meant, but one thing seemed certain. She wasn't getting into that last seal without help. Slowly, reluctantly, her eyes turned towards the data card sitting next to the scroll. Okay. This better not end with me covered in paint, though. With her 4 senses attuned for any potential danger, Ahsoka took the data card and slipped it into her holopad. With one last check for any hidden surprises, she started the recording. A blue hologram of Naruto, about 15 centimeters tall, flickered into life above the holopad. In the hologram, he wore his trademark eye smile and waved enthusiastically. Happy birthday, Ahsoka! Sorry, again, I couldn't be there in person, but I arranged this instead. Pretty wizard, huh? You were probably scared I was going to prank you with the data card or something, though. I was not, Ahsoka growled reflexively, before her stripes darkened in embarrassment when she realized she had just tried to argue with a recording. She was very grateful no one, especially Naruto, had seen her do it. Hologram Naruto kept talking as if nothing had happened. Not this time, though. I just wanted to say hi, and to tell you that you're the most awesome best friend anyone's ever had. Jedi are supposed to be humble, though, so don't let it go to your head or anything. I mean, it's true, but still, be humble in your awesomeness. A grin stole across her face even as her montrals burned out of embarrassment from his words. Her stripes were practically black now, and some feeling she couldn't identify flared to life in her chest. Whatever it was, it felt warm and soft, and she liked it. Oh, also, you probably noticed already, but you can't get into the last seal just yet. It's password locked, so you'll have to write the password in the blank space before you can open it. If I'm right, you should be getting the password in the next day or so. Until then, I guess you'll have to use some of that patience Master Liam and Obi-Wan are always saying you don't have. Think of it as your chance to prove them wrong. Have fun. With one last cheeky salute, the hologram shut off. Ahsoka glared at the blank display, as if she could somehow project her annoyance and affection towards her irritating friend through the inert machine and into his brain. Unfortunately, she didn't have time to properly fume. She had to hurry if she didn't want to be late for morning meal. Her day continued normally until midday meal. Vire made a good show of pretending she didn't regret flying with her after training, even though the poor girl's face had turned an ashy green color. The rest of her classes were the usual mix of boring and interesting. Just as she was sitting down to eat, though, she felt a sudden yank, followed by the rushing sensation of a kawarimi. When her head had stopped spinning, she found herself perched atop one of the arched ceiling supports, hidden from view. Next to her, grinning like a Kowakian monkey lizard, squatted a familiar human. Kark, Anakin, what was that about? She thumped him in the ribs as hard as she could in their precarious position. He winced and held up his hands in surrender. Ow. Watch it, Snips. She growled at her nickname, but he paid it no mind. It's your birthday. I'm kidnapping you. You're welcome. Ahsoka took a deep breath and counted to 10 in every language she knew. Only in the demented minds of Anakin or Naruto could any of those sentences go together. She loved Anakin like an older brother. He was usually a great mentor, but sometimes he could be crazier than a solar flare jockey. It wasn't bad, per se, but you needed to adjust to it. Sky Guy, I still have classes. I think they'll notice if I just suddenly vanish from the mess hall. Ah, but that's where you're wrong, Snips. You're still down there, see? He pointed towards the dining tables, looking far too satisfied with himself. When she followed his finger, she saw she was, apparently, still sitting in her seat, eating her meal. No one around her seemed to have noticed anything amiss. A shadow clone? She asked. Anakin nodded and somehow contrived to look even more smug. Yep. I checked your schedule, none of your other classes need the Force. It'll pass as you, while you enjoy your birthday present. What do you think? Annoyingly, Ahsoka couldn't see anything wrong with the plan. Anakin's hinged clone probably could pass itself off as her for the rest of the day, and she didn't doubt that whatever activity he had lined up for them would be more fun than sitting around in class for the next 6 hours. She didn't want to give him the satisfaction of admitting he had a good idea, though. Not after he had kidnapped her in broad daylight. What about my food? She snarked, just to be contrary. I am not going hungry. Anakin just shrugged. We'll stop at Dex's then. We've got plenty of time. With a sigh, Ahsoka relented. Anakin laughed and pumped his fist in victory, before swinging her onto his back. She had just enough time to brave herself before he flashed through a quick set of familiar hand signs and they vanished in a quick shunshin. Chapter 29. After everyone had left the shuttle and Akage Bunshin began piloting it back to the temple, Naruto gathered all 6 of his former clanmates in the classroom. Once there, he dropped his former easygoing demeanor and put on a much more serious face. The sudden change ensured that the others were paying attention to him. All right, listen up. All of you have passed your Padawan trials back at the temple. That's why you're here. It's time for you to take the next step in your journey to become a Jedi. The surge of eager anticipation he felt from all 6 of them nearly brought a smile to his face, but he kept his bearing. The gathering was a sacred rite of passage, and Mace had spent long hours drilling proper respect for Jedi traditions into his head. When he thought back to how incredible it had felt to find his crystal, and the trials he had faced to do so, Naruto couldn't find it in him to disagree in this case. Your success up to now is impressive, but a far greater challenge lies ahead. We're going to the most sacred world of the Jedi Order, Ilum. There, you'll each head into the crystal cave to find your Kyber crystal. If you succeed, you'll use that crystal to build your lightsaber. That declaration sparked an even bigger surge of excitement, along with a few quiet cheers and wide smiles. While they had all known they would soon build their lightsabers, hearing it confirmed was something else. Amidst the high-fives and celebration, though, Trilla pushed her way to the front of the group. The dark-skinned girl had a frown on her face, and there was a current of unease beneath her happiness. Naruto, what do you mean if we succeed? Why wouldn't we find our crystals? The others quickly fell silent as the implications of her question sank in. One by one, they looked at him with rapt attention, waiting for an answer. Your crystal isn't something you find easily. You have to earn it. When you're in the cave, you'll each face challenges. Tests, unlike anything you've faced before. It's a tough journey, one that takes courage, discipline, and will. It was clear from the expressions of wilted enthusiasm that none of them had actually considered whether finding their crystals would be easy. Naruto supposed it made sense. While the initiate clans knew the general purpose of the gathering, the actual details were a closely guarded secret. He and Jiraiya had only received a more in-depth briefing before embarking to Ilum because of their special situation. I thought we already passed our tests. Galdos yelled, his quills bristling indignantly. Now you're telling us we have to go through more? How is that fair? Naruto fixed his age-mate with a hard, unyielding stare, but he kept his voice calm and even as he brought his master's old lessons to mind. A lightsaber is a heavy burden to carry, Galdos. It represents a great trust, and as Jedi, we must be worthy of it. If you're truly ready to wield one, then I have faith you'll find your crystal. Galdos' quills flattened against his face as he looked away, his previous anger draining out of him. The others looked equally contemplative until a new voice from the back of the room spoke up, startling them. Well said, Padawan Uzumaki. Rare it is for one your age to have such respect for the power of their lightsaber. From behind the rows of shelves at Naruto's back, an ancient-looking droid stepped out of the shadows. It was humanoid, with an extra set of arms folded on its back and two round, yellow photoreceptors. Its face was oddly stylized, with a dome-like upper half, two conical projections where most sentients kept their ears, and another two below its vocoder that resembled a beard. Unlike the typical jerky, robotic efficiency most droids displayed, its movements were fluid, nearly organic. Naruto raised an eyebrow at the dramatic entrance, but decided to roll with it. Initiates, this is Professor Huyang, he said, gesturing to the old droid, who bowed. He's been teaching others just like you how to build lightsabers for thousands of years now, and he will be the one to oversee your blade's construction. But, he's a droid, Ahsoka said. Several of the others, including Nox and Barris, seemed to share her confusion. How's a droid supposed to help us build lightsabers? Huyang twitched his head in an apparent show of irritation. Young lady, don't let my inorganic status fool you. As Padawan Uzumaki stated, I have been guiding younglings like you in building lightsabers for millennia. Difficult indeed would it be to find a greater expert on the subject than I. Tell me, do you know how to build a lightsaber, Any of you? How to align the flux aperture? What happens if you invert the emitter matrix? Ahsoka's Leku and Montral stripes darkened in embarrassment, and she silently shook her head. The rest of the initiates did the same when Huyang's yellow gaze passed over them. No? Well then, it seems I have something to teach you, after all. Padawan Uzumaki, your lightsaber please. Naruto unclipped his lightsaber from his belt and placed it in Huyang's waiting hand. The droid brought it up to eye level and scrutinized it, turning it this way and that with the air of one analyzing a curious scientific specimen. Ah, yes, an excellent design. I see you've added to the carvings since I last saw this. Beautiful craftsmanship, especially considering you never learned from me. Naruto rolled his eyes at the pointed remark. Are you still hung up on that? Let it go, Professor. Jiraiya and I didn't blow ourselves up, and our blades work fine. The venerable architect sniffed disdainfully, but he turned his attention back to the others, so Naruto counted it as a win. Huyang had been scandalized when he and Jiraiya had shown him their lightsabers to catalog for his archives. Apparently, the idea of Jedi constructing their first blades without receiving his instruction was tantamount to heresy in his eyes. No matter, Huyang said. You all know what a lightsaber is, what it can do, but how does it work? How will you build one? Not with your hands, oh no. With the Force. Padawan Uzumaki, if you would be so kind as to demonstrate. Naruto smiled a little and closed his eyes. His lightsaber twitched and floated out of the droid's hands and crossed the room until it hung in front of the clan. With slow, careful precision, he used the Force to disassemble the blade. When he was done, his lightsaber resembled an asteroid field of individual components orbiting slowly around the glowing sun of his crystal. He took a moment before addressing his audience to bask in the unfiltered light of his crystal as it sang to him in the Force. While the professor can teach you the mechanical side of building a lightsaber, only you can assemble your blade. A lightsaber is an extension of a Jedi's will, of their being. With the Force, you'll take separate components and a living kyber crystal, and forge them into dash. With a twitch of his hand, he quickly reassembled his blade. As the last component clicked into place, the hilt flew into his outstretched palm and he ignited it, bathing the room in sunset light. A lightsaber. After that, Naruto left them to learn in the capable hands of Professor Huyang, while he went to the cockpit and began prepping for their first hyperspace jump. Fortunately, the first leg of their journey lay along a fairly major hyperspace corridor, and the Navi computer took only a few seconds to complete the calculations. As soon as they were finished, Naruto pulled the lever and sent the ship into the endless blue tunnel of hyperspace. Once that was done, he settled back into his seat for the long journey. Unlike the T6 shuttle he had taken on his first trip to Ilum, the Crucible was not built with speed in mind. It only had an old Class 3 hyperdrive, and even in the relatively large hyperlane they were in, where they could travel at full power, the ship wouldn't be setting any speed records. In some ways, that was a good thing. It gave Huyang time to impart his knowledge, and the initiates time to meditate and center themselves before facing the trials of the cave. Unfortunately, it also gave Naruto a great deal of time in which he had nothing to do. He'd already sent a clone off to the engine room to read the latest texts his various classes had assigned him amidst the soothing background noise of the ion drives. While constructive, that sadly did nothing to ease the boredom of sitting alone in the cockpit. He supposed he could have gotten the astromech to monitor everything while he spent time in the rest of the ship, and he probably would later, but for now, he felt the need to center himself in the cockpit. I guess I might as well meditate, he thought. It's as good a way to pass the time as any, and maybe it'll help me figure out why I still have that bad feeling about this mission. He closed his eyes, focused on his breathing, and tuned out the faint hum of the surrounding equipment. With every breath, he sank deeper into the currents of the Force, and immersed himself more in its ebb and flow. Soon enough, the whole of the outside world faded into the background, replaced by the vast majesty of the Force. It was not, perhaps, as soothing an experience as it might have been. The veil of the dark side pressed in like scum on a river, muddying the waters and obscuring much of his view. The future was all but impossible to discern, save for a few brief glimpses of violence and a general feeling of looming cataclysm. Beyond that, though, it was an impenetrable morass, and had been for years. The present, however, remained blessedly clear, and it was in the present that Naruto always preferred to dwell. Immense, glittering rivers of light flowed across his mind, washing away his trepidation, leaving calm joy in its wake. He probed gently for answers, but, unsurprisingly, nothing was forthcoming. While he could meditate easily enough, Naruto knew he still lacked the skill and experience to truly ask questions of the Force and interpret the answers. Such a thing often challenged veteran masters with decades of experience and training. For now, all he could do was marvel at the ocean of swirling light before him, and try to learn whatever he could from what he saw. Even if answers never came, he was still content to sit and watch. Normally he would rather be doing something, but at the moment, he genuinely had nothing to do. This, at least, wasn't boring. He could see the great web of life strewn across the galaxy. Details escaped him, but he could still discern the broad strokes. Tensions were on the rise throughout the Republic. There was more anger and fear in the galaxy than there had been a year ago, spread across the Republic like cracks in a window. Even with the efforts of people like Padme and her allies, Naruto worried that the war so many Jedi could sense in the future was fast becoming inevitable. He didn't know how long, exactly, he spent meditating, but it must have been hours. Long enough for Huyan to finish his initial lesson, judging by the two familiar signatures he felt approaching the cockpit. The stronger one, full of drive and movement and curious eager and no, was definitely Ahsoka. The other one, slightly less powerful, but far calmer and filled with patient wait and exasperated fond, could only be Barriss. He sensed her hesitate outside the cockpit door, unsure of whether to disturb him, but Ahsoka had no such qualms. She barged ahead and was just about to open the door herself when he opened it with the force. You know, if you two projected any louder, I think even Huyan might sense you, he teased. Ahsoka ignored him and went over to fiddle with the ship's controls, but Barriss flushed green and looked down, muttering apologies, embarrassed at her apparent slip-up. He quickly brushed Ahsoka away from the more vital flight instruments and tried to reassure Barriss. Hey, relax. I was just joking. Your shields are fine. My senses always go up when I meditate. Now, what do you two need? You look like you've got questions. Yeah, but before that, you were meditating? Ahsoka asked, a skeptical look in her eyes. I thought you hated meditating? And, sitting still in general. Naruto rolled his eyes. Says the most twitchy, impatient initiate in the whole temple. I don't hate meditating, I've just usually got something else to do. Right now, I've got nothing. So, Barriss, what did you want to ask? Ahsoka glared at him in mock outrage. How come Barriss gets to ask? I was talking. Sure, but Barriss has been nice to me all day, he said, in the most maddeningly serene tone he could bring to bear. You've been a pest. So, Barriss? Well, I was wondering, we were both wondering, really, if you could tell us what it's actually like to be a Padawan. Naruto blinked mutely for a second, unsure of what to say. He'd been expecting a question on lightsaber construction, or perhaps on what to expect on Ilum. He'd had answers prepared for both such inquiries, do what Huyang says and criffloads of snow respectively, but this was a totally different question than he had been ready for. Both she and Ahsoka were staring at him, though, and they deserved a good answer, so he cleared his throat and tried to order his thoughts. Well, it's a lot of work, he said. Like, more work than you've ever put into anything before. You have to give everything you have to your training every day, no matter what it is. Heck, and you've also got to get used to making mistakes. Mistakes? Barriss, ever the perfectionist, sounded faintly ill at the thought of such. Naruto just nodded and gave her an eye smile. Oh yeah, you're gonna mess up. All the time. You should hear Master Windu go on about some of my screw-ups. He paused and tried to emulate the stoic man's voice. It's always, stop reprogramming the temple droids, Naruto. Stop violating traffic ordinances, Naruto. Stop traumatizing younglings classes, Naruto. Stop setting buildings on fire, Naruto. Stop getting arrested, Naruto. You'd think I was some sort of troublemaker. Whoa, hold on. You got arrested? Ahsoka asked, a mix of confusion and awe on her face. How in the Sith hells did that happen? Naruto blanched as he realized he may have overshared just a bit. Maybe that's not important right now? He tried weakly. To his shock, it was Barriss who shook her head, killing any hopes he may have had to avoid that story. If even prim and proper Barriss wanted to hear that story, there was no hope of it staying quiet. Sorry, Naruto, but I'm with Ahsoka. You have to tell us what happened. Naruto sighed and pouted at her as best he could from behind his mask. And you were being so nice to me earlier. I blame Ahsoka. She's a bad influence. Barriss nodded, and Ahsoka just shrugged, looking quite pleased with herself, as if he'd just paid her a compliment. It was a mark of how close their friendship was that he knew that's exactly what he had done, and she knew he had meant to do it. Ugh, fine. It was last year, during my mission to Roman. The council heard a rumor that Jenna Zonarbor might have been hiding there, so they sent me and Master Windu to investigate. She'd already left by the time we got there, but the government there was horribly corrupt, and their leader, this evil Slimo named Roitada, was the worst of the bunch. The things he was doing. Naruto shuddered as he recalled Tada's crimes, and the putrid ooze that he had leaked into the Force. The man had been like a piece of rotted fruit, wrapped in a pretty enough skin, but stinking and filled with foul slime. Long story short, I sort of snapped one night. I could sense what he was doing in the palace. It was bad. Really bad. Once again, Naruto shuddered at the memories of what he had sensed that night. He moved on quickly, though. If he paused too long, Barris and Ahsoka would get curious, and he did not want them asking questions about the details of that night. They were hardly delicate, but he still had no interest in giving them nightmares. He was a criminal scughole, and I wanted him to stand trial for it, so I broke into his palace, snatched him, and took him back to our ship so we could bring him back to Coruscant and give him to the courts. Barris probably couldn't have looked more surprised if he had actually set her robes on fire. Naruto, isn't that kidnapping? The state security forces definitely thought so, he said with a sheepish chuckle. They caught me just outside the palace with Tada slung over my shoulder, stunned me before I could run, and threw me in jail. The only reason they didn't kill me on the spot was because Tada wanted to use me as a bargaining chip once he realized there were Jedi on his planet. So, what happened to you? Ahsoka asked, engrossed in his story. He was a little surprised she wasn't taking notes, but that was probably a good thing. Well, Master Windu couldn't come get me, or Tada would have just tried to arrest him, too. Even if he could have freed me, I don't know if he would have. It really ticked him off when I snuck out without telling him. Anyway, once I woke up, I escaped pretty easily, and stumbled onto a rebel group planning a coup. Once I convinced them I was a Jedi, they let me help them. Their plan had been to storm the government district by force, but I figured out something better. While I was escaping the holding cells, I noticed a ton of gaps in Tada's security. I managed to sneak the rebels into the palace, take down the guards, and seize control of the city. By the time Tada and his cronies woke up, they were prisoners in their own quarters. Before too long, the rebels had a whole new regime set up. You helped overthrow a planetary government? Barris whispered in horror. Her mouth hung open and her eyes had widened to the size of dinner plates. Wizard, Ahsoka said. He really hoped she didn't get competitive about this. That definitely wouldn't end well. She might not limit herself to overthrowing actual dictators. Yeah, I think Master Windu almost had a stroke. It turned out okay, though. The rebels wanted to kill all the old officials, but we convinced them to give them trials. Most of them wound up in prison. Tada got executed, though. Afterwards, Master Windu had me clean out the exhaust ports of every ship in the temple hangar. By hand. He said it would keep me out of trouble for a few weeks, at least. So, is that the only time you've ever been arrested? Ahsoka asked. So far, Naruto said, praying that they believed him. They didn't need to know what happened on Corellia. No one needed to know what had happened on Corellia. That had just been humiliating. The point, though, is that you will make mistakes. They're unavoidable. But Master Windu and Jiraiya both taught me it's how you move through them that matters. A busy sort of silence grew between all three of them. Barris and Ahsoka seemed deep in thought, their emotions slow and quiet. Naruto, for his part, couldn't help but think back on some of his own mistakes. For all that he could spin a funny tale out of one of them, many others had not been humorous at all, either at the time or in retrospect. The lessons they had imparted had made him a better Jedi, certainly, but they had often come at far too dear a price. All I can do is learn from them and grow, he thought. That's what Jiraiya always says, and Master Windu says he's right. They sat like that for several minutes, comfortably letting time pass them by. When someone finally broke the silence, to Naruto's surprise, it was Barris who spoke up. When did you know the sort of Jedi you wanted to be, Naruto? Her tone was odd, as if she were asking something different from what her actual question was. He couldn't figure out what it could be, though, so he gave her an answer and hoped it was what she needed. I suppose, before I even became a Jedi. Even before Quinlan and Ayla found me and Jiraiya, back when I was a shinobi for my village, I already knew what I wanted. Ever since my first mission out of Konoha, I've known I'm supposed to protect people who couldn't protect themselves, to keep my comrades safe. Being a Jedi hasn't changed that. I just have more people now, I guess. Ahsoka nodded. I knew back when we ended up in the Undercity and we had to free those slaves. When I heard how they talked about the Republic and the Jedi, how they felt abandoned, I knew I had to change that. I'm going to make sure people like that always have someone to protect them." Barriss listened quietly, and didn't talk for a long moment. When she did, her words came slowly, as if she were measuring each one before giving voice to it. "I think I want to be a healer," she said. "You two are both so brave, but I don't think I can fight like that. I just want to help people and take their pain away." "I think that's pretty awesome," Ahsoka said, nudging her friend in the shoulder. "You'd make a great healer, Barriss." "Sometimes I don't know if I can do it," Barriss whispered, her gaze distant. "That's why I told Master Luminara I wanted to wait before I became her Padawan." "What?" This was the first time Naruto was hearing about this. "She approached me a few months after you left the creche, Naruto, but I asked to remain with the clan until I passed the gathering. I wasn't ready. I needed more time to study, so I'm prepared when she takes me on." "Ah, are you sure you didn't just want to spend more time with your friends?" Ahsoka teased, giving Barriss a friendly push. The older girl smiled, despite her obvious efforts to keep her bearing, and shook her head. "Well, that part wasn't objectionable. I've enjoyed being around you and the other clan members." Her smile faded, replaced with a small frown. "But I want to make her proud. I won't be a burden." Naruto found the depth of her conviction striking. Beneath her calm and poise, Barriss had a fierce drive towards perfection, one he found simultaneously impressive and a little frightening. He didn't like how little she thought of her own accomplishments. "Barriss, you are not a burden," he said firmly, looking her straight in the eye. "You're going to be a fantastic healer and a brilliant Jedi, and Master Luminara will definitely be proud of you." "Okay?" After a second, Barriss bit her lip and looked away. A surge of something colored her force presence for a moment, but it passed so quickly that Naruto couldn't tell what it was. I should go meditate on my lightsaber," she said. Her voice wavered for a moment, but when she met his gaze again, he saw only her usual tranquil composure. "Thank you for your advice, Naruto. It was very kind of you." Before he could say anything else, she hurried out of the room. Ahsoka called out after her, but it was too late. She had already closed the door. "Well, that was strange," Naruto said. Ahsoka just rolled her eyes and shook her head at him. "You laser brain. You know how she is with people showing emotion. Now you've gone and embarrassed her." "I just stang. Should I apologize?" "Nah, that'll just freak her out even more. Just let her meditate." Ahsoka glanced around the cockpit, practically drooling over the control panels. "Hey, can I fly the ship?" "No." "Oh, come on." "No. You get to build a lightsaber, I get to fly the ship. That's how this works." She tried growling at him, a low, trilling rumble that could paralyze prey with fear. He just raised an eyebrow at her, an expression he'd learned from watching Obi-Wan. "Growling? Really, Sokka? What are you, 5? Don't try pouting either, it doesn't work anymore. It's not like there's anything to do, anyway. We have another 4 hours in hyperspace before our next jump." "Fine." She sighed dramatically and flopped into the co-pilot's chair to stare at the glowing void beyond the viewport. When he glanced over at her, Naruto could see the tension in her brow, and the way she worried at her bottom lip. Even with her shields raised, it was obvious that something was on her mind. "When did I become the guy everyone goes to with questions?" he wondered. It was still a novel experience for him, being seen as a source of knowledge by his peers. Probably when the council gave me this mission. It's not like Huyang can talk about stuff like this, after all. The thought of the ancient, stuffy architect droid trying to dispense personal advice was enough to bring a small smile to his face. He entertained himself with imaginary scenarios of the professor consoling nervous younglings with technical diagrams and circuit schematics while he waited for Ahsoka to give voice to her thoughts. In his experience, whenever she was like this, it was best not to prod until she was ready. Asking before then just led to defensiveness or deflection. It took a few minutes, but eventually, his patience paid off. "Naruto, I'm worried," she said. Her voice was soft, but steady, and he waited for her to say more. "I don't think anyone's going to want to take me as a Padawan." He hadn't been expecting that. "Hey, don't think like that. There's gotta be loads of knights and masters who would want you. Your dash. No one's asked me, she interrupted. No one's even talked to me about it. I thought a few times some of the masters have, but they never talk to me. They just watch for a while and then leave. Naruto winced. He could definitely sympathize. Having authority figures, people you wanted to impress, seemingly judge you without a word, reject you with no given reason. It was a scenario he was all too familiar with, and his heart ached to see his best friend going through something similar. He didn't think any of those knights or masters were specifically trying to hurt her, but it didn't change the sense of glum resignation he could hear in her words. I know I'm not ideal Padawan material, she continued. Even Master Liam says I'm still too impatient, too disrespectful, too reckless. But Barris has Master Luminara, Nox has Master Halsey, Trilla's got Master Juinda, and Guldos has Master Bulk. Even Vire's probably going to get picked by Master Trevor. I thought someone would want me. Naruto had a theory as to why no one had approached her, but he didn't feel comfortable sharing it. For one, he wasn't sure about it, and unless he talked to Anakin, he couldn't be. Probably not even then. The last thing he wanted was to give her false hope, or put his brother in an impossible situation. Instead, he spun his chair so he was facing Ahsoka. She kept staring out of the viewport, but he spoke anyway. Don't worry about that for now. Plenty of people don't get picked right away. Besides, I think you'll make a great Padawan. She snorted, but he pressed on. I mean it. You've got the strongest connection to the Force of any initiate in the temple right now. You're kind, compassionate, and you've got great instincts. So what if you're kind of rude sometimes? Not every master has a stick up their ass. It might take some time, but I promise, someone will pick you. They'd have to be crazy not to. Her stripes darkened almost to black at his compliments, but she turned to look at him, at least, and she was smiling again. Besides, who cares what other people think, he said, remembering how he'd motivated himself as a child. If no one wants to take you as a Padawan, then you'll just train more, and get stronger, until nobody can ignore you. Don't let anyone else define you. Prove them wrong. It sounds easy when you put it like that, she muttered. It's not, but that doesn't matter. Just focus on what's in front of you for now. Find your crystal and build your lightsaber. That's what's important right now. The Force will guide you through whatever comes next. You think so? Now it was his turn to snort. If it doesn't, I'm sure you'll find some way to kick its butt until it starts. That actually got her to laugh, a clear, brilliant noise that chased away the glum atmosphere like wind blowing away smoke. He laughed with her, hard enough that he didn't notice she had gotten up until he felt her skinny arms snake around his shoulders to give him a quick hug. Thanks, Goldie. You know, you're pretty good at the whole motivational speech thing. Really? Yeah, she said. So, can I fly the ship now? Please? What? No. He sputtered, his head nearly spinning from the sudden change of topic. I told you before, there's nothing even to do except sit and stare at hyperspace. She pursed her lips for a moment before she shrugged. Sounds better than meditating. Scoot. What do you mean, ga? Before he could finish his question, Ahsoka wedged herself into the same chair he was using, squirming around to fit in next to him. Ahsoka, what are you doing? She looked at him as though he were being an idiot, which he felt was rather uncharitable, considering she was the one pummeling him to one side of his own chair. It's like you said. I'm going to sit and stare at hyperspace. Now budge over, Goldie. Naruto's mouth moved silently beneath his mask, too stunned for words. I will never understand girls, he decided, as he resigned himself to the inevitable. Never. After some more wriggling, and several new bruises on his part, both of them were somehow squeezed into the same chair. They weren't so much sharing the seat as Ahsoka was partially next to and partially draped over him, but at least she'd stopped moving around. It wasn't exactly a comfortable arrangement, though, at least not for Naruto. Ahsoka had started her growth spurt, and as such, she seemed to mostly consist of remarkably bony elbows and knees. While it felt to him as though he were being cuddled by a pile of sharp sticks, he made no attempt to dislodge her. He'd learned from grappling with her that Ahsoka had the clinging capacity of an arboreal Dianoga. Once she'd latched on, pulling her off was the nearest thing to impossible. Was there something wrong with the other chair? He protested weakly. It was more for the sake of his pride than anything else. He actually didn't mind too much, and he knew how easily she could become touch-starved. Togruta were even more social and tactile than humans, and few Jedi were comfortable with such casual physical contact. Just from their brief period of cuddling, he could already sense her contentment as the stress she had been carrying slowly dissolved. "It's cold over there," she said, and laid her head on his shoulder. "You're warm, and you sound good." "You know, I still don't know what that means." She shrugged. At least, he thought she did. Her shoulders dug into him for a moment, anyway. "I don't know how to explain it to a human. You just sound good. Now shush." He sighed, but shifted over as best he could to give her more room, and to get her left elbow out of his right kidney. For a long while, they sat and stared at the vast, roiling storm of the universe as it smeared across spacetime just outside their ship. Naruto knew some pilots closed blast shields whenever they were in hyperspace, out of fear the sight of it would drive them mad, but he never did. Gazing out at the infinite gave him a sense of awe, especially knowing that he was technically seeing the entire galaxy, and possibly even the entire universe, from all angles simultaneously. It may have looked like a tunnel surrounded by blue light, but it captivated him. After a while spent watching the cobalt tapestry, Naruto noticed Ahsoka's breathing slow. When he looked down, her eyes were already closed, and her presence was dominated by warm Drosisafe. He nudged her lightly to get her attention, but she just grunted and adjusted her arms a little. "Ahsoka? Hey, Ahsoka, wake up." She shifted her head and muttered into his shoulder. "GSTFBL. You know, I speak 5 languages and that didn't make sense in any of them," he said, smirking. She cracked one eye and gave him a baleful, if sleepy, glare. "Why doan't speak FV Elmwags," she mumbled. "Your Tigruti sucks. There's nothing wrong with my Tigruti." "Oh yeah?" She added her other eye to her glare. "Gili ao Lecro Maliastable Basamla, EIR?" Naruto stared at her for a few seconds before he conceded defeat. "Okay, so I speak 4.5 languages. The point is, you can't nap here. But am comfy." She said it as though she wasn't contorted into a shape usually reserved for abstract art just to fit in the chair next to him. "You won't be saying that later if you sleep folded up in a chair. Now go, before Huyang comes and chews my head off for distracting you. Meditate on your lightsaber. It really is important." She sighed, and he could sense her reluctance to go back to the youngling quarters and the perceived monotony of meditating, but she didn't argue. Instead, she extricated herself from the chair and stood up, stretching like a tuka as she did so. After a few more jabs at his apparently lackluster Tigruti, she finally headed out the door. Right before she walked out, though, she turned back to look at him. "Just so you know, I'm really glad you're the one assigned to us for the gathering," she said, her voice unusually serious. "You're my best friend, and there's no one I'd rather have helped me build my lightsaber than you." Now it was his turn to blush in embarrassment. Genuine compliments like that still caught him off guard, especially from those closest to him. Thanks, Ahsoka. Really? You're my best friend too. I'm happy to be here with you, and with the rest of the clan. Now go meditate. I'll be out later to help you guys." "Yes, sir." She shot off a cheeky salute, pivoted on her heel, and marched off. He laughed at her antics before turning back to his earlier meditation. It would be an hour yet, before any of them were ready to work through whatever insights they'd gained in their meditation with him. Until then, he settled back into a trance and watched the lights of the Force dance in his mind. The next day of travel went smoothly. Naruto talked with all the initiates about the insights they'd gained while meditating. He even joined Barris and Nox in a joint meditation to guide them through the process. It took a while, as, despite the council's confidence in him, he was still relatively inexperienced with the Force. Still, by the end of the day, he felt confident he'd done all he could to help them with their blade designs. Mostly, though, he answered questions. The endless flood of questions, some smart and insightful, others predictably silly, almost reminded him of those times he'd taught Konohamaru. After his dismal performance in the academy, and his endless complaints about how boring Irika's lectures were, he never would have expected to enjoy teaching. To his surprise, though, he found the experience rewarding. It helped that he was helping his friends, but even so, there was a tranquil joy in the task that the action-loving young Jedi had not expected. While Mace often spoke of the more peaceful side of being a Jedi, the diplomacy, mentorship, and healing that made up most of the Order's duties, Naruto had never really understood how many Jedi found such things fulfilling until now. That didn't mean he was about to change his path and pursue the life of a negotiator or a healer. Much like his master, he was a warrior at heart. For now, though, he was content to enjoy a peaceful mission for once. Looking back later, that alone should have warned him. Sadly, it did not. Around 40 hours after they had left Coruscant, Naruto headed back into the cockpit to calculate their next jump. The ship was approaching Rago, the last charted system on their current hyperspace route. From there until they reached Ilum, they would be flying through largely unmapped wild space. He could have let the astromech program the calculations and make the jump, but he preferred to do it himself. What was the fun of flying, after all, if you just let a droid do all the important bits for you? He was looking forward to seeing the planet as the ship came out of hyperspace, a sight no pilot, Jedi or otherwise ever tired of. The moment the Crucible reverted to real space, though, a tidal wave of danger and hate-kill bloodlust swamped his force senses. Before he could raise the deflector shields, the ship bucked and shook as a pair of concussion missiles slammed into the hull. What the dash? He didn't have time to finish before the door to the cockpit opened, revealing Huyang and a group of nervous-looking initiates. Padawan Uzumaki, what is going on? We're under attack, he said as he finally managed to raise the deflectors, all thoughts of peace and tranquility gone. Hopefully that would stave off any more damage. Scanners are picking up 3 ships. They knocked out our hyperdrive and our long-range communications. He flipped a switch to activate the short-range broadcast. Unidentified vessels, this is Jedi Padawan Naruto Uzumaki aboard the Crucible. You are firing on an unarmed Jedi training vessel. We have nothing of value. Break off your assault now and you could escape before anyone comes to arrest you. Be smart and leave before this gets worse for you. Ha ha, I don't think so, Jedi scum. The voice that came out of the calm was twisted with such hatred and malicious glee that it nearly gave him a headache just to hear it. Aura Singh doesn't let her prey escape. Beg for life if you want, though. I love it when Jedi beg. It's delicious, Aura Singh, Barriss whispered. Oh dear. Naruto privately agreed with her concern. Every Jedi knew the story of Aura Singh, the fallen Padawan turned ruthless assassin. She had probably murdered more Jedi than any one person in the galaxy, with one possible exception. That she was here, now, meant any chance they had of getting out of this situation peacefully had just evaporated. He reached for the comm again, in order to try to stall for time. All that greeted him was a squawk of static, though. Short-range comms are jammed. Hold on. He fired the maneuvering thrusters as high as they would go while simultaneously gunning the sublights. With a groan of tortured metal and overworked inertial dampers, the Crucible pitched downwards, passing just beneath another volley of missiles. His success was short-lived, however, as a spurt of blaster fire raked across the shields and jolted everyone inside. Arg, it's no good, he said, desperately trying to maneuver through the incoming fire. They're more maneuverable than we are. Naruto, what are we gonna do? Vair asked, a question he very much wished he had an answer to. As the ancient ship shook beneath an onslaught of increasingly accurate fire, he cast about desperately for any options. They couldn't fight back, they couldn't flee, and they couldn't call for help. Panic, dark and ugly, tried to claw at his throat, but he forced it away. He had 6 people and a quasi-sentient droid he was responsible for on the ship with him, and failure was simply not an option. R1, can you get the hyperdrive working? The astromech warbled and skunked into the ship's systems. It whirred away for a few seconds until an especially powerful burst of fire slammed into the shield. The whole ship jerked violently, and the hapless astromech went flying backwards, sparks dancing over its frame and smoke leaking from under its dome. Well, that option's out. Get to the escape pods, he said to the initiates behind him. I'll get closer to the planet and you can land there. Go. Huyang, with them. You're in charge. The droid nodded and began herding his charges out the door. Come, young ones. Quickly now. To the escape pods. Naruto, what about you? Ahsoka shouted. I need to screen your escape with the Crucible, or they'll shoot down your pods. Now get going. I'm not gonna leave, why dash? That was as far as she got before he lost patience and used the Force to pick her up and whisk her out the door and down the hall to the escape pods. Her indignant cursing echoed through the ship as he forced her to abandon him against her will, and the righteous fury and desperation she projected only reinforced how upset she was. I'm sorry, Ahsoka, he thought. I need to guarantee your guy's safety. If I live through this, I'll make it up to you. He kept his grip on her with the Force until she was safely inside one of the pods, and then immediately launched all 3 of the pods on that side. Only 2 were occupied, but he wanted a decoy, just in case. Alright, now let's see how tough this old ship really is. Once all 3 pods had cleared the ship, he focused on protecting them from the 3 fighters trying to kill them. It was difficult, as they had greater speed and maneuverability than he did, but he had the advantage of size. He managed to soak up most of the initial fire, but it was quickly becoming obvious that the smaller ships would soon outmaneuver him, unless he could somehow focus their attention on the Crucible for a bit longer. Time for part 2. While he had been telling the truth when he said the Crucible was unarmed, that didn't mean it was completely defenseless. It may not have had any weapons, but it did have 3 potential projectiles left, and Naruto could be in more than one place at a time. He was fairly certain that what he intended to do violated multiple Republic laws, and was probably impossible to boot, but it was his best and only option, so it would just have to do. With a single, lightning-fast hand sign, he created 6 Kage Bunshin. You know what to do. They saluted and sprinted off, stumbling as the ship shook and sparks flew from overhead. Hurry! The shields won't hold much longer. It took only a handful of seconds for his clones to get in position, but it felt like an eternity. At any moment, he was sure one of the more nimble craft would dart around the limping Crucible and target his former clanmates in their escape pods. It took all the piloting skills Anakin and Mace had taught him to keep his injured ship in between the vulnerable pods and the incoming fire. Finally, though, the internal comm squawked. Boss, we're all set. Great, now wait for my signal. He carefully lined up the Crucible as best he could with the 3 enemy fighters. It wasn't optimal, but he sensed it was the best he could hope for. Okay, go. As one, the 3 remaining escape pods, each with 2 Kage Bunshin in it, shot off the Crucible and barreled towards the enemy ships. As he expected, all 3 fighters immediately targeted the pods, but it was already too late. The escape pods may not have been especially fast, but they were small and exceptionally nimble. They had also launched very close to the attacking ships. By the time the pilots had spotted them, they were too close to target easily. A few bolts glanced off the durable armor of one pod, but most of the blaster fire and missiles overshot the tiny vehicles and slammed into the Crucible. A bevy of new alarms sounded. Really, how many different alarms did one ship need? And the whole ship listed dangerously into the gravity well of the planet below, but Naruto kept his concentration on his clones. Not yet, now. He generated chakra for a brief moment and formed the snake seal. Boom! Boom! Once the pods were as close to Aura's fighters as he needed, Naruto made his single hand sign, and all 6 of his clones immediately and violently exploded. The Force ripped the escape pods apart, and, judging by the sudden shock and fear he felt, also roughed up the enemy ships. He doubted it had destroyed any of them, but the scanner was broken and he didn't have time to check it anyway, because he'd just noticed what the latest alarms were for. The last volley had finally punched through the shields and destroyed the engines. There was nothing to keep him from falling to Rago. Well, I guess I'll have a chance to put Anakin's crash landing training to use, he thought philosophically, in an attempt to take his mind off the pain to come. Besides, I was planning on landing the ship anyway. Unfortunately, there was a big difference between crash landing a simulator and crash landing an actual crippled ship. Along with the engines, the stabilizers and repulsors were shot, and the maneuvering thrusters were sluggish and weak. Judging by the rapidly increasing G-forces Naruto could feel compressing his organs, the inertial dampers had also taken some damage. All in all, as the Crucible tore through the cloudless skies above Rago, trailing smoke and debris, his trajectory was much closer to an outright crash than a crash landing. In the cockpit, surrounded by cracked screens and slagged controls, Naruto worked fiercely to maintain some semblance of control over the doomed ship. With the unforgiving surface of the planet looming ever larger in the viewport, it was all he could do to ensure that the Crucible didn't nosedive into the ground at 5,000 kilometers per hour. He even tried to use the Force to slow his descent, but without instruments he couldn't tell if it worked. He thought it might have, but by then it was too late. With an awful grinding crunch, the ship slammed into the ground. Despite bracing himself, Naruto flew out of his chair upon impact. The last thing he saw was a plume of dirt shooting up in front of the viewport, then his head hit something solid and everything went black. Aurra Singh smiled and ran her tongue over her teeth as she watched the Jedi ship plummet into Rago's atmosphere, crippled and aflame. It was better this way, she thought. Blowing up a ship was all well and good, but killing Jedi was something she preferred to do face to face. She wanted to see their terror, hear their pathetic whimpers and gasps as the life poured from their bodies. Death in space was too easy. Jedi deserved to suffer, and she deserved the pleasure of watching it. Just the thought of it set her insides all a-quiver. This one in particular, though, had proven to be clever prey. That trick with the exploding escape pods had been ingenious. She would have to remember that for future use. It was unlike a Jedi to weaponize something with a peaceful purpose, and so deceptively too, but this Naruto Uzumaki seemed to have an unusually practical side for one of his sanctimonious order. Probably a result of Mace Windu's training. A self-righteous bastard he may have been, but even she would admit that Windu had skill. Skill he had clearly passed on to his little Padawan. Yes, Naruto Uzumaki would give her a fine chase. All ships, this is Aurra, she said over her comms. Land near the wreckage and the pods. Have your men fan out. Find the Jedi brats, and bring them to me alive. Copy that. Her smile turned downright predatory. It was time for her to go hunting. And when it came to hunting Jedi, she always liked to use bait. I'll make Ahsoka's hunt too. After a satisfying meal at Dex's diner, Anakin took Ahsoka on a speeder deep into the lower levels of Coruscant. Whenever she asked him where they were going, though, he just repeated it was a secret and she would love it. Eventually, she gave up asking and just watched the other speeders fly by as they descended. Finally, Anakin piloted their speeder into an out-of-the-way garage and jumped out. From the excited smile on his face, Ahsoka guessed they had reached their destination, whatever it was. It certainly didn't look like much. Most of the other speeders were heaps of junk, the walls were cracked and covered in graffiti, and there were piles of trash in the corners. The light from the tired illumination strips played warily over the faces of the few other beings around them before it left to go play somewhere more healthy. Overall, it was not an encouraging sight. Sky Guy? Are you sure we're in the right place? She walked a little closer to him as they passed another rough-looking group heading the same direction as them. Yeah, we're almost there, he said, seemingly unaware of her apprehension. Trust me, this'll be amazing. Ahsoka didn't bother to voice her skepticism, and instead focused on staying by Anakin's side. They walked down a long, winding corridor and took an ancient-looking repulsor lift even deeper into the city's depths. When the doors opened, though, it wasn't an impoverished urban wasteland that greeted Ahsoka as she had been expecting. Instead, a veritable wall of noise nearly rocked her back on her heels. Outside the lift, she saw vast banks of spectator stands, filled with countless beings, all of them cheering and whooping and screaming their lungs, or the species equivalent, out. It took her a moment to regain her bearing among the sudden crush of noise and movement and life. When she finally noticed what all the excitement was for, though, her jaw dropped and she turned to stare at Anakin. No way. This is a trick. Nope, he said, grinning from ear to ear. No trick, Snips. A pod race. You brought me to watch a pod race. She was jumping up and down in excitement. This was better than she could have hoped. Anakin laughed and shook his head, though. Watch. Oh, Kark, no. I brought you to compete. These are two-person races, and you're going to be my co-pilot. Words failed her. Ahsoka's lips moved, but no sound came out. Eventually, she just gave up trying to talk and tackled Anakin with a flying hug. She may have let out a high-pitched squeal, too, but she would never admit it. Anakin caught her weight easily and held her while she babbled and laughed with glee. This is the best. She finally got out. Of course, Snips. It's your birthday. Now come on, we have to get ready. Our first race starts in 20 minutes. First. This just kept getting better and better. Of course. This is a competition, and I've got the best co-pilot in the galaxy with me. We're going to win this whole thing, just you see. Ahsoka felt so full of happiness she could have floated away. This was going to be the best day ever. The racing was epic, beyond anything she could have expected. As co-pilot, she was in charge of navigation and repairs. It took a few minutes for her to get the hang of calling out the various turns and dips and swoops as they appeared on her map of the course, but soon she and Anakin settled into an easy routine. By the end of the first race, they were practically unbeatable. There were a few close calls, including one where she was hanging upside down beneath their pod, patching a ruptured coolant line while Anakin weaved around their competitors at speeds that had her eyes watering and her leku flapping about her face. They nearly burst into flames once or twice, and their pod would definitely need a new paint job or 5 to cover the souvenirs of Anakin's exuberant piloting style. Both of them were covered in grease and grime from head to toe, and Ahsoka's butt and back were bruised from the repeated harsh turns and vibration. She also had a headache from the constant G-forces, not to mention the deafening racket. By the time she and Anakin stood at the top of the podium and collected their prize money, which Anakin promptly donated to a charity that helped combat slavery, Ahsoka was sweaty, filthy, sore, and practically dead on her feet. She couldn't ever remember having had more fun. After they, quite literally, hosed themselves off, Anakin flew them back to the temple. Ahsoka honestly couldn't say how long it took, as she kept dozing off to the hum of the engines. Eventually, she noticed the engines shutting off, followed by a voice saying something. She mumbled back, too tired to properly respond, and then 2 powerful arms wrapped around her and picked her up out of the speeder seat. There was motion and warmth, and she thought she heard laughter. With an exhausted sigh, she curled into the warm thing holding her, and then sleep finally carried her off. The next morning, Ahsoka woke up in her bed in the creche, wishing violence upon the alarm, Anakin, and the universe in general. Some part of her wondered how Anakin had gotten her into her bed without alerting anyone, but the rest of her was too grumpy to care. Her back and butt still throbbed from bouncing around in the pod for so long, and 3 hours was nowhere near enough sleep after such a long day. She wouldn't have traded the experience for anything in the galaxy, but it didn't make it any easier to wake up. There was nothing for it but to push through, though. She afforded herself 10 seconds of wallowing in self-pity before she pushed her discomfort to the side, drew on the force for energy, and rolled gracelessly out of bed. Trilla shot her a questioning look, but she ignored it. Coming up with a story to explain her exhaustion was at least 2 cups of CAF beyond her current brain power. Better to just keep her head down and act normally. When she stumbled into the common area for morning accountability, though, that plan flew out the window. Standing next to Master Liam was Master Shak T. The Togruta counselor was something of a personal mentor to Ahsoka, having been responsible for teaching her what she knew of Togruta culture and history, as well as ensuring her fluency in her native language. She wasn't as close to the older woman as she was to, say, Master PLO, but she had spent a fair amount of time under her tutelage, especially when she was younger. Those classes had petered off over the years, though, as Ahsoka's training advanced and took up more of her time. In her bleary state, it took her a minute to realize why other Togruta was there. When she did, though, she forgot all about her grogginess, and had to restrain herself from jumping in excitement. After Master Liam had gotten her head count, Master T pulled Ahsoka aside. "Tir Sula, Ahsoka. It's good to see you." Ahsoka bowed and finished the formal Togruti greeting. "Tir Sulu, Master T. It's good to see you, too." She scratched her rear leg awkwardly, a habit she had picked up from Naruto, and tried to keep the excitement from showing in her voice. It didn't work very well. "Is this about my hunt?" Amongst Togruta, it was traditional for every child, after they had turned 13, to prove their skills by going on a solo hunt and bringing back their kill to the tribe. It marked their first step in becoming adults, and Ahsoka had been looking forward to it for years now. In all the excitement of yesterday, though, she had completely forgotten that Shak would be approaching her about it soon. The older Togruta's face remained calm, but eyes flashed in amusement as she looked down at the eager girl. "Yes it is, Ahsoka. We'll spend the day going over your skill to make sure you know everything you need to. I hope whatever Skywalker took you to do last night didn't leave you too tired to train." Ahsoka shook her head. No, I'm fine. I can wait. How did you know about that? She would have sworn Anakin had gotten them out of and back into the temple undetected. Shock smirked but said nothing, and Ahsoka actually growled a little and stomped her foot. Childish, perhaps, but she hated when people teased her. A moment later, her stripes burned in embarrassment as she realized what she had just done. Force, I acted like a total brat in front of Master T. Before she could apologize, though, the sound of laughter broke her from her thoughts. Ha ha ha. Shock's laugh startled Ahsoka. She was used to the Master being much more serene. Calm yourself, Ahsoka. We Masters have to maintain some mystique, after all. Consider your unsatisfied curiosity as punishment for sneaking out. Ahsoka forced down the impulse to stomp her foot again. Instead, with a saccharine sweetness no one who knew her would ever think was genuine, she bowed and said, "Yes, Master T. I apologize for my behavior. It won't happen again. Just for that, you've earned an extra 3 runs through the 3rd level obstacle course." Ahsoka winced, even though Shock's tone held more amusement than irritation. The 3rd level course was no joke. She would feel that for days. Now come along, Ahsoka. We have much to do. It was well past nightfall by the time they finished for the day. True to her word, Shock had tested Ahsoka's fitness, agility, and hunting knowledge to the limit. It had been grueling. When she had finally completed the last exercise, climbing a difficult series of rock walls while listing the proper means of setting snares, Ahsoka had flopped to the ground in a puddle of exhausted Togruta. Shock had given her a whole minute to recover, which was about 1/1000th of what Ahsoka felt was fair, before she coaxed her to her feet. You did very well, Ahsoka. I'm glad to see you have been practicing what I taught you. Does that mean I'm ready? Ahsoka panted, blinking sweat out of her eyes. When Shock said yes, she would have jumped in the air and whooped, but she was just too tired. As it was, she managed a smile and a faint cheer. Before you go to bed, I have something for you, Shock said. She reached into her robe and produced a folded slip of flimsy. Naruto gave this to me before he left on his mission and asked that I give it to you before we left for Shirley. Ahsoka took it and unfolded it. On it, in Naruto's neat handwriting, were the kanji for Ryoshi, the Nihongo word for huntress. Thanks, Master T, she said. I know what this is. When she got back to the creche, after she had showered and changed, she pulled out Naruto's sealing scroll and a brush. She copied the kanji from the flimsy into the blank space in the 4th storage seal, careful to mimic the symbols as closely as she could. Naruto was constantly going on about how delicate and finicky Fuinjutsu could be, and Ahsoka didn't want to risk starting a fire or ruining whatever Naruto had given her. Only when she was satisfied that she hadn't made any mistakes in her calligraphy did she channel chakra into the last seal to unlock it. To her relief, the seal opened with a burst of white smoke. When it cleared, it revealed a hunting knife and a sheath sitting atop the scroll. It was a simple knife, but gorgeous for it. The single-edged blade was about 18 centimeters long, with a clip point and a gently sweeping belly, perfect for stabbing, cutting, and skinning. The handle had a full tang and a pommel, and was made from some sort of dark wood. It had a simple crosshatch grip pattern carved into it, and was perfectly contoured for her hand. When she grabbed it to test the weight and balance, Ahsoka noticed a note tied to the guard. When she unfolded it, she recognized more of Naruto's handwriting. Ahsoka! Happy birthday again, and congratulations on your hunt. I made this for you, and I'd love it if you carried it during your hunt. I'm sorry I can't be there in person, but I'd probably just annoy you, anyway. Besides, I know you'll be amazing, even without me around to compete with. The toads helped me forge the blade. It's made of chakra-conductive steel and quenched in their special oil, so it's nearly as strong as Mandalorian iron, and you can channel chakra through it when you learn how. I made the handle out of wood from the forest outside my old village. Jiraiya had some sealed away for some weird reason. You've got the will of fire, even if you were never a Konoha shinobi, and I thought you should have something to remind you of that. I hope it serves you well on your hunt. I can't wait to hear all about it. May the Force be with you, Naruto. Ahsoka put the note down, a smile threatening to split her face in half. Force, he can be so annoying, and then he goes and does something like this. She shook her head. Freaking doofus always knows how to make my day. She was still smiling when she fell asleep. The next morning, after a hasty meal, she packed her gear, strapped her new knife to her leg, and met with Master T in one of the temple hangars. Ahsoka's impatience lent her a haste beyond even her normal energetic pace, and in record time she had stowed her equipment and strapped in. Even then, she didn't stop tapping her foot until they were finally in hyperspace. "I'm gonna take down the best prey anyone's ever seen," she told herself, bouncing in her seat. "I can't wait to see the expression on Naruto's face when I tell him all about it." That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfiction. Looking forward to having you on board again.